Majority Report with Sam Seder. It's time to look in the mirror, America. Do you like what you see?
I keep referring to Obama as the magic Negro.
Do you like what you see now?
Well, suck on this.
It's just a mirror, America.
Shared sacrifice by everybody.
What could it do to you except reflect your image?
I did nothing wrong at the Minneapolis airport.
The Majority Report.
Far more credible to me than PBS and Frontline.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, July 12th, 2018. My name is Michael Brooks. On a Michael Thursday, pinch hitting for the 4-day work week man himself on the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Meagan Day. She's a journalist and writer for the Jacobin. We're talking about how capitalism is ruining science, why creeping marketization has created perverse incentives for researchers, threatening the wholesale corruption of science itself. Donald Trump, the blimp has arrived in the UK. Protests will greet him, and nonsense will continue to pour out of his mouth. He's now winning a NATO. The Judge Kavanaugh nomination marches forward. The war to destroy the last vestiges, women's rights, the next attacks on labor, reproductive justice, everything else. The Supreme Court versus democracy as Democrats start to rally a bit more effectively than they did out of the gate. And there is a new piece of legislation by the same man who now represents Congress but used to be a prosecutor who let off Eric Garner's killer that would criminalize Antifa. It's part of a wave of legislation that started at a state level designed by Republican legislatures to crush down and block public expressions of protests.
Solidarity Antifa?
Solidarity Antifa. In Montgomery County, the Democratic Party has elected a DSA-backed Democratic socialist who's talking about rent control and workers' rights, and now a mediocre third-way corporate Democrat has dropped out of the party and is running as an independent, potentially creating a spoiler effect because need to be pro-business. We need pro-business.
He's not even a Democrat.
In this case, he actually is literally the Democrat. But yes, belying that whole nonsense argument. And Brazil's Workers' Party has called out the lawfare coup, which has imprisoned President Lula da Silva after a weekend mess, which saw him ordered to be released from prison, but in fact remaining there. All that and more on today's Majority Report. I want to get to this story briefly before we get to this sound. And this is a really actually important point of intervention. There's a debate that people can have about Antifa, its tactics, its ideology, and so on and so forth. It's an area that I am more sympathetic and supportive of Antifa than many, but I understand the validity of some of the critiques, and I don't think it's conceptually and intellectually above reproach. That said, Richard Spencer clip was one of the greatest things I've ever seen in my life, and more importantly, as soon as legislation like this happens, all the other nonsense goes out the window. This is actually an analog to why someone like me is like, all right, whatever, but now it's time to vote for Hillary in November. Because when greater threats appear, It doesn't mean that the debates and arguments go out the window, but it does mean in terms of primary focus of action and resources, the immediate threat needs to be addressed. And the immediate threat right now is a piece of legislation that Dan Donovan is proposing in the House of Representatives. He's a Republican who represents Staten Island, and I'm going to touch on, or actually already teased it in the intro. He was previously a prosecutor who chose to not bring murder charges, or at the very least manslaughter charges, against the cop who choked out Eric Garner on the street. That was, of course, the man who was selling loose cigarettes, who got put in a chokehold while police stood on and watched. Bystanders asked him to stop as he was clearly murdering and killing the guy. And Eric Garner obviously was losing his life as the chokehold by the officer continued. This is the same guy that chose to not prosecute that crime. And he has now proposed a piece of legislation which quote unquote, this is from The Independent, imposes penalties on anyone who, quote, injures, oppresses, threatens, or intimidates, unquote, another person while wearing a mask or a disguise. Now, let's break this down. From a legal perspective, if you injure somebody else, if you oppress somebody else, I don't know what the hell that means. But let's start before we get to the nonsense. Injure somebody else is assault or battery of some sort. That's illegal. Okay? So no need for new lawmaking there. And incidentally, if you're concerned about who's actually instigating violence in these conflicts, go look at the fascists, not the people resisting them. The capital murder that has come out of these conflicts so far was the death of Heather Hare by a young pro-Nazi activist aligned with the far right. Oppress, I don't know what that means. Maybe we're in intellectual dark web territory, like my freedom of speech. Which means, of course, for these people, don't protest or question anything I say. So don't have a counter protest to my protest because you exercising your free speech would threaten my free speech. And then intimidate or threaten. Now, again, actually intimidate or threaten are both other things that if you actually clearly legally demonstrated that, those are actually things that are already on the books. So putting this disguise moniker is, first of all, people across the board wear disguises. So theoretically, this could be used against right-wing forces. We know it's not going to be. Number two, it's obviously specifically targeted at a group like Antifa that is primarily publicly known for hiding their identities because they don't want to be doxxed by people that support Nazi policies, as an example. And it adds the type of vagueness of this writing, by the way, could literally mean anything. A disguise doesn't literally have to be a mask because you could just be, I don't know, wearing an outfit. Maybe like Matt goes to a protest and wears like a 1980s style Adidas tracksuit.
I'm a furry.
Yeah, maybe he's a furry. It doesn't mean a thing. But we all know how this legislation will be applied. And frankly, as a second order issue more broadly, this is a cooling effect on protests and public demonstrations of any sort, period, which everybody should oppose, frankly. That actually is an important principle that we should fight for.
Yeah.
But, go ahead.
The penalties are absurdly stiff.
Yeah, that's what I'm going to.
Sorry.
People could get up to 15 years in prison. 15 years in prison under this legislation by Donovan. So... And then I just want to quote briefly from a member, Janine Renee, who Cunningham was a member of the New York's Metropolitan Anarchist Coordinating Committee. This bill explicitly targets the tactics used by anti-fascists to protect themselves against the violence and harassment of far-right groups who routinely target them. As a result, it should be considered a tacit support of not only fascism, but also dangerous alt-right groups in this country. She's absolutely right. It's part and parcel of broader efforts that we saw at the state level, including legislation in North Dakota that was aimed at the Dakota pipeline protesters, which essentially said that if you got run over by a car protesting, that was legal, essentially. There's no recourse. There's other pieces of legislation on the state level that essentially target you for engaging in acts of civil disobedience or protest that could in any way affect businesses' profit margins. So in other words, it's like, yes, if you're protesting by, I don't know, say a Starbucks that has thrown out 2 black people who are waiting for 2 minutes before having a meeting, and then people go back to that branch to protest the racism of Starbucks. Well, I guess theoretically, somebody might say, oh man, it looks like there's a big crowd around the Starbucks. I just needed to dunk in for a minute, grab a coffee. I'll go somewhere else. Under some of the interpretations of state statutes that they put forward, that could mean that the protesters could be, at the very least, civilly liable with exorbitant fines for doing that. And that's why when you look at the type of nonsense and fear-mongering and fascist bleeding that somebody like Mike Huckabee did last week about his stupid daughter and about Democrats not respecting the results of the election. First of all, this is exactly what someone like Erdogan says in Turkey. There's an election day, you vote. When the vote's over, you shut the fuck up, period. The majority wins, that's it. That's it. And that is both profoundly anti-democratic and, in fact, even profoundly anti-liberal, if we're being honest about it. And then that number 2, that whining and freaking out by Republicans about these acts of protest are not only their typical cultural agreement, they're going to be packaged with policy to criminalize dissent, which makes the New York Times editorial board, Washington Post, David Axelrod, like, we're going to be nice and civil, that much more delusional and disgusting because this is actually in play. This shit isn't a debate about manners. You can oppose all this stuff if you want, but if you don't understand the primary threat of a legislation like this, or even just the J20 protesters, where finally, a couple of days ago, the last charges were dropped against them, but that's still over a year of time of legal threats, wasted time, having your life be invaded for exercising your constitutional rights. Get in the game or shut up. And here are some people in the game. These are people protesting Mike Pence, one of the most loathsome people in the world, in Kansas City, Missouri, I believe. Is that right? Kansas City, Missouri.
It is great to be back in Kansas City with men and women who elected a Congress and a president.
And another important piece of protesting.
I just comment on that.
Go ahead.
Every time that this response is prompted, that like somebody does something righteous and the response of the crowd is USA, USA, that there's something very powerfully instructive about that. And so people should keep doing this sort of shit.
Yeah, we're taking it back. Oh, and in case anyone is still confused as to whether this law specifically targets Antifa, there are specific carve-outs for cops because, as everyone knows, the cops are allowed to wear disguises and spy on protesters.
Oh, if anything, this legislation, I'm sure, probably even has specific... there's going to be provisions to allow cops to be even more invasive of groups like that, which they already profoundly are, even pre-9/11. Look at infiltration of the environmental and animal rights movement.
Yeah, exactly. What we know about them taking pictures of those sorts of organizers is that's obvious why they want the masks off, and that's obvious why the masks are there in the first place, and the masks should be allowed to fucking stay there.
Precisely. Here's more people, though. I will say this is an example, if we want to quote future in a positive sense, mask off, effective protesting, the turtle, the arch scum of the United States Senate. He had a meal disrupted in Kentucky. Here's Mitch McConnell getting it from some people that care about basic human decency and democracy. They're playing Public Enemy.
It was a DJ, I think, that was meant to work at the... It says on the sound sheet, actually.
Hero.
A bar trivia host recognized him and used his speaker to disrupt McConnell's dinner, playing the song "Fight the Power" by hip-hop group Public Enemy.
That's beautiful.
That's you want to have an open-air dinner. That's what you're going to get.
Yeah. Listen to Fight the Power, asshole. All right. We will be right back with Meagan Day on the Majority Report. We're talking about why capitalism is ruining science and logic.
We're the science and logic defenders.
We're the science and logic defenders, guys. Sorry to say. Makes me a little bit sick to say it myself. All right, we'll be right back with Meagan Day.
Good God of grace and will, I have His mercy. I miss an old slave driver. Time is catching up on you, old slave driver. I know your sins them are on. So carry we go home. I bring the brown east. Well, come on a Rasta man. A Rasta no live on no capital land. Oh, you mean? Carry we go home. Oh, you mean? I said we settle and cease. Well, come on a Rasta man. A Rasta no live on no capital land. Well, Lord America a capital and the whole of Jamaica a capital and a long time them want trick the Rasta man. Like them no know said that man a real African. You think me no member King Ferdinand and thief in Columbus have a golden plan. They make a wrong turn and end up in Caribbean. One Ras then a side kill enough Indian and turn paradise in a plantation and bring cross one ship load of African. Now here comes the thief in Queen from England. Now she Cromwell and Henry Maga. Sent it on top a century full of separation. And after 400 years me send a reparation. I know them want to kill me with the taxation. But I beg you please take me to the motherland. I beg you carry me go home. I bring me from the east. Come on a Rasta no live on no capital.
Chronics, Captured Land. I'm trying to remember to tell people the music. Joining us now is Meagan Day. She is a staff writer at the Jacobin magazine. The Jacobin magazine. The Jacobin. Meagan, thanks so much for being here. How are you?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's great to be talking with you. Was just saying to you in the break. I've always learned a lot speaking with you and reading your writing. You have a new piece out in Jacobin called "Capitalism is Ruining Science," and you actually start with an observation that seems like it might come as a shock to the Steve Pinkers of the world, which is that science actually predated markets. Can you explain this basic history to us?
Yeah, it's more that I think that that's true. The observation that I make is really that the university existed before capitalism.
Right.
The point being that, the university doesn't necessarily operate by market logics, or at least it hasn't all throughout its history. It's often been devoted to other more noble aspirations than maximizing profit and accumulating wealth, and including those of science, right? Like discovering truths about the world around us that can help us build on our collective body of knowledge and better our world. But, as I point out in the piece, there has been a recent trend in the academy toward market logics, toward the dictates of the capitalist market. And we see increasingly that universities are succumbing to market logic, and that therefore science is as well.
So get into that more specifically. Is this about, is it about winning grants? Is it about publish or perish for individual academics? Is it about the need to generate R&D research that can benefit pharma or weapons manufacturers? Kind of get us through the different facets of how these incentive structures are taking over the scientific enterprise.
Yes, definitely. So that's the main thrust of the piece. So I start out by basically pointing out that Ellen Meiksins-Wood is a theorist of capitalism, and she has what she calls a few dictates of the capitalist market, imperatives of competition, accumulation, profit maximization, and increasing labor productivity. And we see all of those increasing in academic science. So primarily, we see that with publish or perish, which is a common maxim, meaning that you need to increase your volume of publications of scientific papers, or else your career is going down the toilet. Another thing, though, is funding or famine. This is like the next level above publish or perish. So you need to secure funding for your research, or else you're not going to be eligible for yet more funding. So that sends scientists on a sort of mad scramble for funding. And the reasons that these things are happening is that, well, there's a lot of reasons. One is that obviously just our entire society is becoming more and more subservient to these dictates of the capitalist market. But specifically in universities, there's a drying up funding stream from tax money. So like public money is not going to universities the way that it once did due to austerity-minded regimes, administrations. So that means that universities are compelled to play by, not public rules, public sector rules, but private sector rules. That means they have to operate like businesses. And businesses, of course, are all about the bottom line, and the health of the bottom line depends on profit maximization. So that, and it's a science it's a science itself, right? Like
Right.
It profit maximization depends on careful and constant evaluation of inputs and outputs. There's a sort of math and a science to it. But the result is that there's been the introduction of a new regime of quantitative performance metrics in universities. And it governs almost everything that scientific researchers do, and it has observable impacts on their work practices. So like you mentioned, there are a lot of different quantitative performance metrics. One is publication count, like I said, publish or perish. And also citations. Citations are being relied upon in professional evaluations in ways that they never were before. And including combined citation publication counts, so like where you appear, how often you appear in indexes, and so on. And then things like that I don't totally understand because I'm not an academic scientist, but the things with names like journal impact factors, and then you also have total research dollars. So this is where we get into funding or famine, and then we've also got patents, which you mentioned before as well. R&D research. So these quantitative metrics are sort of dominating decision making in everything from hiring new faculty to promoting professors to tenure to also awards and also to funding.
So let's indulge, and we'll actually, this will kind of fuse well with a question of, because you cite research that's showing, in fact, the raw amount of scientific research and productivity is increasing in correlation with this regime. And there is definitely the very standard response that you would get, and certainly from the sort of mainstream purveyors of quote unquote science. And I am thinking specifically of Steve Pinker, but I think even also the kind of cult and mythology around Elon Musk would say, well, science is increasing, quote unquote. We need constant innovation. And, two things. One, boo-hoo professors, do your work like everybody else. That's the one very typical kind of punitive neoliberal logic. And then that number two, even if they might even say, okay, even you coffee shop, Jacobin lefties, you don't like Raytheon or Pfizer or whatever, but even you would say that, as an example, the internet was a publicly funded, government-driven project, and that's a big point for our side on the socialist end of the equation. And at the same time, it was very much a military project, and one, that was a byproduct of, research that was centered on the military-industrial complex. So they might say, even if you don't like that the R&D is so much going into the corporate sector, that research will still have a spillover effect, not only in markets and product innovation, but just in general raw science. And now you can obviously tell my editorial a little bit in this, because I've really gotten sick of the discourse that just science is like some type of, ironically, like mystical spiritual thing with like its own innate value, versus like specific things like debunking dogmas, creating medicines, which are very good things. But if you don't politicize the concept, you have just this kind of blind faith in science as a teleology, basically. But that being said, the two responses I think would be, the more science, the better. Maybe you could respond to the quality of the science that's being produced. And that number two, there will be a spillover effect regardless, because, again, essentially more science, better, better.
Right. Yeah, I mean, maybe we could call that approach trickle-down science, and I don't think it's, any more sound than trickle-down economics. I think that you have to make political choices from the outset about where you're going to allocate resources and how in order to improve public well-being, right? Like pursuing science for the well-being of the public is very different than pursuing science for the well-being of corporations' profits. Right. So to go back to your first thing, though, which is the question of quantity. Yeah. Apparently, scientific output, if you measure it by work citations, has doubled every 9 years since roughly World War II. This is from a paper that I cite extensively in my article. The paper is called Academic Research in the 21st Century, Maintaining Scientific Integrity in a Climate of Perverse Incentives and Hypercompetition. It's a long title, but it's a great paper, and the authors are Mark Edwards and Siddhartha Roy. And their observation was that actually quantity does not translate to quality. In fact, on the contrary, if you track the effect of these quantitative performance metrics that I was talking about before on the quality of scientific research, you'll find that it has a detrimental effect. So as a result of, for instance, reward systems that incentivize publication volume, scientific papers have become shorter, they're less comprehensive, and they boast worse methods, and an increase also in false discovery rates. Another one is, in response to like the growing emphasis on work citations and professional evaluations, which I talked about a moment ago, reference lists have become bloated to meet career needs, not to meet, the needs of the work itself. And there's an increasing number of peer reviewers requesting that their own work be cited as a condition of publication. And after I published this article, I actually heard from someone who had just gone through this a few days prior that she was trying to get her paper published in a peer-reviewed journal, and reviewer number 2 stepped in and said, "I really think that this work needs to build more on my work," right? And so you see the way in which, but the reason that reviewer number 2 was saying this, obviously, is because reviewer number 2 is under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure to get more citations in order to improve their own career prospects. Right. So you see that this actually erodes the integrity and the quality of the work, because when people are experiencing a sort of like precarity and when they're in competition over scarce resources, their priorities change. They're no longer able to simply focus on the integrity of the work. They have to focus on their own bottom line, as the university is focusing on its bottom line. So it becomes an everybody race to the bottom. And there's a couple of more ways in which this happens. One is that there's a system right now increasingly where you reward increased grant funding with more professional opportunities for increased grant funding. So like the more money you get, the more money you're likely to get. It shows the money is sort of like an award. It shows that you are worth putting money into. And that's the way in which a lot of academic scientists are actually funding their careers. This is because obviously we're seeing funding streams dry up from the public sector. Due to austerity and due to privatization. You could call this a form of privatization. But what it results in is scientists spending an outsized amount of their time writing grant proposals, which is not the amount of time. I mean, you should be spending that time thinking about complex, deep questions and looking for complicated truths. And you also see scientists overselling the positive results of their research to catch the attention of funders, because funders don't want to fund things where, the hypothesis was proven untrue, or where, essentially no information was found, which is good information. When no new information was found using the scientific method, that's actually technically good information in science, but it's not good information in the world of grants. They want to see results that they can package and they can put on their website and they can sell, right? Yep. So you actually do see scientists overselling, like I said, the positive results of their research, which actually compromises the integrity of the entire scientific endeavor, I think. And then the final one is that, as Edwards and Roy point out, when universities reward departments for ranking highly, which is something that happens a lot, it's kind of like with No Child Left Behind, with grade school. If the departments rank highly, they get, more money. And this actually incentivizes departments to, as Edwards and Roy say, reverse engineer, game, and cheat rankings. And they see sort of observable effects of this, and they map this out in their paper. And that, of course, also erodes the integrity of scientific institutions themselves. So this is a long, winding way to say that the trickle-down effect of whatever sort of like R&D investment we see is, I think, dwarfed by the incredible crisis in academic science, the crisis of integrity, that is.
Right. So you basically, it's going to be like less discovering, the structure of DNA and more Thananos or whatever the hell that thing was called, essentially.
Yep.
Right.
Yes, Theranos. Yeah.
I believe she's actually mounting a comeback, if I understand correctly. But
great.
Yeah. No.
Bring her back.
Yeah. Totally. Well, she makes for good grant copy. You have a great. You cite and translate research really, really well in this piece, and usually, as always, is typical of your work. But you also have a kind of really great personalized case study of this, and it's a gentleman by the name of Peter Higgs, who won a Nobel Prize in 2013. Now, if you were just looking at this from the outside, one would assume that somebody whose research going back to the 60s, which culminated in a Nobel Prize, would be the toast of his department and, insulated in sort of, acolytes and professional and social recognition. But actually, no.
Right. On the contrary. So Peter Higgs, I should say, he's the British theoretical physicist who, in 1964, he predicted the existence of the Higgs boson particle, sometimes called the God particle, which he doesn't like. But anyway, you might recognize it. He won the Nobel Prize in 2013 for that work that he had done in the 60s. And after winning, he sat down with The Guardian, and on his, sort of inaugural interview, they basically were like, do you have anything to say, Peter Higgs, about academic science? And instead of saying what you might expect him to say, he said, quote, "It's difficult to imagine how I would ever have enough peace and quiet in the present sort of climate to do what I did in 1964. Today, I wouldn't get an academic job. It's as simple as that. I don't think I would regard it as productive enough." Right. And he also said that in the latter years of his career at Edinburgh University, he became, quote, an embarrassment to the department when they did research assessment exercises. So they would send around an email saying, please give us a list of your recent publications. And he would send back a statement saying, nothing, none. I don't have any recent publications. And according to him, the university kept him around despite his insufficient productivity, solely in the hopes that he would win the Nobel Prize, which would then be a boon to the brand of the university in this contemporary sink-or-swim environment where there's more austerity and less public funding. So Peter Higgs basically narrowly escaped the fate of being given the axe solely on the basis that he had conducted research in the 1960s under a completely different climate, which had led to major breakthroughs in theoretical physics. I think that that's a really interesting case study because one of the things also is he basically speaks to that point I mentioned earlier, which is if you're chasing grants and citations, you're losing opportunities for careful contemplation and deep exploration.
That's exactly, and I think what's amazing and so fast and disturbing but elegant about that is when you bring in essentially like the time politics dimension of it. And the discipline and regimes that basically capitalism instills in people to, hyper efficient, limit them and constrain them as workers, but then also rob them of any time to be fully developed human beings, which of course spills into their work if one is allowed to have it spill into their work. And you do a type of work like theoretical physics where you do actually, literally sort of need that time. But it kind of perfectly bridges the whole chain of how science is being distorted by capitalism, because you could take examples that we've already known for quite some time, like why is it that there's so little R&D and research that's sort of desperately underfunded to deal with things like malaria as an example? Well, because there isn't a market for that kind of drug research. It primarily affects poor people in underdeveloped economies, so why would we put our research into that? And if the universities and the commons and the public sector are undermined and pharma's driving the show, there's not going to be solutions for those sort of problems. And then that actually runs up the chain to this is somebody who really actually revealed something about like the foundations of our universe and where we came from, these kind of really deep things that are also really important. And he's saying, I wouldn't have been able to give this to you in this environment. And it's kind of a mind-blowing, like, we wouldn't learn something that is foundational to, like, the whole game of us even being here to begin with because of, like, some type of new dumb citation metric. I mean, let that sink in.
Right. I mean, even it's not that you say we wouldn't learn something.
Yeah, maybe
we aren't learning things right now. There are things right now that we're missing out on because there are brilliant scientists who are spending their time doing things other than finding out the deep, complex truths of our universe, right? So I think that this is a problem that we're actually experiencing the negative effects of quietly right now. We have more brilliant people with more institutional support and more basic fundamental knowledge to work from than ever in human history. And yet we also are not seeing the fruits of that fully come to bear because we are basically distracting these people, selling their own labor on a market instead of, sitting and thinking and working and quietly sort of searching for the more complex truths that govern our universe.
Two quick questions to sum up. Number one, is there within the scientific community? I mean, there's these different inklings across sectors. I mean, we saw it in the teachers' strikes as an example, and and obviously people facing much more raw economic pressure. But is there some sense of politicization in these communities as a result of this environment?
I don't think I think that the answer is yes, but also not enough, right? So one of the things about science workers is that, like many academics, notoriously hard to organize. So teachers, funny, people talk about education and logistics and hospitals as basically being contemporary factories. So you have Amazon warehouses that look actually quite similar to factories, and then you have schools. And you have hospitals, and these are places where workers sort of all work in really similar conditions. They work in, facilities, in bounded facilities, and they're able to sort of communicate with each other. And that might be why we see the teachers' strikes, and we see, nurses are some of the more militant workers in the labor movement. And you also see, attempts to organize logistics workers, UPS workers, Amazon workers, and things like that. But academics are funny. They're in a kind of liminal space because they're both workers in these big sort of like nouveau factory-like settings. The university is certainly one of those, but they're also, middle-class professionals who are essentially curators of their own brand, selling their own labor on a market and being their own sort of brand ambassadors, which is quite different from, how a nurse works in a hospital. And to some extent, you lose solidarity among workers when they're sort of looking out for themselves. And so I think that that's been a major complaint about the ability to organize academics against some of these things. And it's also true that it's not obvious who the boss is that you're supposed to put pressure on. I mean, essentially, it comes down to probably the root. The root is like a combination of university administrations, which continue to impose these neoliberal performance metrics, and then the federal government itself, which continually cuts off funding to universities, as well as state governments. But it's when you don't have solidarity and you don't have people thinking of themselves as workers and you don't have them thinking of themselves as, a united class that's facing a collective problem as opposed to individual problems, it's very hard to attack those. It's very hard to stand up to those, root causes and those major agents of the problem, right?
Absolutely. Final question, and this is on my mind. I just recorded earlier today a dissection for Michael Brooks' show of this new Steve Pinker book, and there's a lot of problems in it. And one of the things that struck me is that right now, and this is actually another great example of the real problem in public discourse of not having Marx in the game. And I'm not even saying, whatever, people can be Marxist or not Marxist, whatever. But this positioning that so many of because people like Steve Pinker who evangelize for this thing called science, quote unquote, are positioning themselves against, reactionaries and religious fanatics or whoever else who sort of deny basic scientific realities, and also in a more, serious way can gun for, educational curriculums, attack public health. I mean, those are serious policy issues. And then on the other hand, there's this caricature of a sort of, ridiculous postmodernist position, which might exist in some area. It's a combination of, first, in some ways, misrepresenting people's positions, and then in other ways, like, yes, maybe you could find like an assistant anthro professor at some college somewhere who said, that I don't know, who made like some ludicrous blank slate argument or something that denied, certain things that we have discovered about, I don't know, how brains work or whatever. And it's totally over exaggerated and also used as a cudgel by people like Pinker to not deal with the politics of science and negate really important conversations about race and gender and class and so on. But at the same time, because there isn't any of this foundational understanding of how literally the scientific enterprise happens from an actual material point of view and what actually drives it, you have a position where the people who are sort of primarily identified with in the public mind with being the brand's ambassadors and asserters of science have nothing to say. In fact, to an extent they do have anything to say, they're part of the problem you're identifying because they buy market logic on everything. So as part of parcel of their call for science is also this push towards the neoliberalization, which will be used on behalf of corporations, not people, and also make us miss out on actual breakthroughs in innovation because of the environment you described. And to me, I think that is because a materialist analysis isn't in play.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that this is a false dichotomy between the sort of like reactionary forces of the contemporary dark age who don't believe in science, and then there's like somehow the real defenders of science who also happen to be pro-capitalist and pro-neoliberal and pro-austerity and pro-market logic. I mean, we have to basically say, no, actually, those two positions can be collapsed into one another to some extent, and then we can stake out a second position, which is that we are pro-science socialists, right? We actually care about public funding, and we care about eliminating the dominance of the profit motive over science because we care about science and because we think it's important and we want to protect it. And then I'll circle back around and explain that a little bit better when I say that those two things can be collapsed together, the sort of like pro-capitalist position and the sort of reactionary anti-science position. The former feeds the latter, and this is something that Edwards and Roy get into in their article. They wrote, I'm just going to read a quote. They're talking about the potentially catastrophic effects of this neoliberal marketization and privatization on science itself. And they write, the combination of perverse incentives and decreased funding increases pressures that can lead to unethical behavior. If a critical mass of scientists become untrustworthy, a tipping point is possible in which the scientific enterprise itself becomes inherently corrupt, and the public loses trust, risking a new dark age with devastating consequences to humanity. So you see how
fake news.
If you have exactly, and if you have, and the point that I'm trying to make is that the sort of like rosy go along with capitalism, go along with marketization kind of position is actually really playing with fire. In terms of this contemporary dark age anti-science attitude, because it's possibly eroding the integrity of the scientific endeavor. And if we care about the integrity of the scientific endeavor and public trust in science, what we're going to have to do is publicly fund science and protect it for the public well-being as opposed to just simply for private profit.
Meagan Day, the piece is Capitalism is Ruining Science. Creeping marketization has created perverse incentive structures for researchers, threatening the wholesale corruption of science itself. It's in Jacobin. It's an incredibly important piece, as really, I basically think all your pieces are. So Meagan Day, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for doing this.
All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. All right, folks. We're going to get to the fun half in a second. I'm going to try to have it be a call and IM heavy fun half because I know that they've been light. What did you say, Matt?
Did we do any calls yesterday?
We didn't do any calls yesterday, so I'm going to try to make up for it. But we do have to end relatively tightly. But we're gonna prioritize the Colin I Am side.
We do have a good clip of Piers Morgan getting dunked on.
It's a beautiful clip. It will bring a smile to everybody's face. You know how much, like, Piers Morgan is such a waste of space that he needs to be so thoroughly dunked on in order for me to even say his name, let alone play a clip with his big puffiness in it. So this one is definitely worth it. That I can tell you. It's true. On the Michael Brooks Show on Tuesday, great conversation with Professor Harvey Kaye on the American social democratic tradition. We got in some really deep debates about fascism, about whether or not to be Democrats in the postgame for patrons. This Sunday, Merrick Sullivan, who is a PhD candidate at Oxford University, and I do a sort of an intellectual history dissection of Steve Pinker's new book, which relates to some of the themes that Meagan was covering there. Next week, Matt Taibbi's in studio for TMBS. Yesterday marked the year-long anniversary of the launch of the Patreon campaign for the show, and a lot of you obviously become patrons and support it. I want to thank all of you and really spread the word. It's been a successful year, and we're doing great work. So check it out at patreon.com/TMBS. Next week, our YouTube channel is launching, and also subscribe to it on iTunes, Michael Brooks Show. And thank you, everybody, for spreading the word. It's actually, we've had a couple, people it surprised me. They're like, oh yeah, I watch TMBS, listen to TMBS. So it's great. And thanks everybody for making that happen. Jamie, what's going on?
Oh man.
What's cooking?
Our current episode, still good. We talk about the New Yorker Union with my friend Aaron, who is part of the organizing drive. They just got recognized, which is very exciting. We talk about labor history. I talk about my unsuccessful attempt to organize my former company, which was...
Oh, word?
Yeah, I learned a lot from it. Very frustrating, disappointing.
Do you dish a lot on
Do you
them?
dish on
A bit, yeah.
Dish.
And this weekend, we're going to record a new episode that's going to be super great as well. And, just have to wait and see how that turns out.
Literary hangover. Have you recorded hungover yet, Matt?
No, I don't actually do a lot of drinking anymore.
Do you do a water boat where you're high during the show?
No comment. Episode 3, Sleepy
indeed.
Hollow. This
Yes.
is when you got to edit the gaps a little bit shorter, so it makes it sound like you're quicker. Episode 3, Sleepy Hollow. The Ichabod Crane story. You think you've heard it, but maybe you actually have. But check it out on iTunes, Stitcher, all that stuff. Or it's on YouTube too if you want to subscribe to that channel. There it is.
Sweet. Good to get some sort of getting us in a different zone, making us think about literature is it's like our cultural antenna, and you can anticipate a lot of stuff with literature. Of course, you can join the Majority Report at majority.fm/become a member. JustCoffee.coop, fair trade tea, coffee, or chocolate. We're still doing gangbusters on the YouTube channel, so
YouTube channel is just rocketing up like a NASA spaceship.
Like
Not
a
made by-
NASA spaceship.
Not made by private companies, just
Yeah.
actually made by
Not Musk.
good
Like a
old-fashioned state power.
1960s with those fucking great thin ties and the Coke bottle glasses, and they were just like, JFK said we need to go to space, see? We're going to do it with less computing power than an iPhone. And that was because of the federal government, bitches. See you in the fun half.
C'est une poupée qui fait non, 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 non. Toute la journée, elle fait non, 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 non.
Welcome to the fun half. I'm Michael. That's Jamie. That's Matt. We're here.
Every time I think I can't find another La Poupée, I find another one.
It's not even mind-blowing anymore. Now I just expect it. I'm just like...
I'm surprised when an artist
why haven't you played the Inuit one yet?
Yeah, were you not recording music in the 70s?
Yeah, right, exactly. Like, were you not? Musky Bag. Michael, why do you love to belittle Elon Musk's success? It's getting old. I'm hoping that this is a joke, because if not, you are a total fucking
Just keep listening,
idiot.
because we'll probably have to answer this again in like 2 weeks.
But wait, then he writes, did you know about the $3 billion purchase order, quota, he puts this in with two stars around billion, order the Vatican recently signed for 50 of his, quote, boy-sized submarines, or that Denny Hastert also has one in order? The man is a marketing genius. Okay, I feel like you're joking. So if you're joking, then you're cool and funny. I apologize for not getting the joke. The top line made you a fucking idiot. The next lines probably make you cool and funny. And I'm sorry I missed the joke, but I'm going with cool and funny.
Did you see the tweet where Elon Musk said that billionaire has become a slur? He's very marginalized right now.
He's getting sensitive.
There was an amazing scene in, I recommend people, like Silicon Valley is a legit good show. And there's a great line where, one of the like prime evil delusional tech billionaire is like, he's at some really, one tech conference, I think with tech reporters playing themselves, and they ask him some like incredibly mild but slightly critical question about inequality or something. And he's just like, I'm really tired of it. Like, billionaires are the new Jewish people, and we didn't even do anything wrong.
That's so good.
It's such a good line.
I also like the joke where they talk about how, like, if this was 100 years ago, we could have just had them snuffed out, because that's true.
That's what's happening in those boardrooms. In the scene, he's sitting with his lawyers, and he's like, 100 years ago, a man like me could have people like that shot, but today, it's different. And then he pauses and he goes, unless. And they give him like the horrified look, but at a certain point, like, there isn't going to be a horrified look.
If I found myself in those boardrooms and also like had my same like penchant for reading history, I'd be thinking like, holy shit, we used to use like the National Guard to put down strikes and shit. We're probably going to need to do that again, because that's how this was won in the first place.
I'd be thinking, I'm afraid of the guillotine.
I think that, right, people on both sides of that equation miss it. Like, they're more afraid of like actual fundamental structural change and think about it more seriously than people who are blasé about the crisis. And conversely, they are infinitely more interested and serious about bringing back things like the National Guard killing people and putting down protests than people who are blasé about that. And the culmination of everything from things like criminalizing video taking of watching animals be tortured in big agribusinesses, as an example.
In a country with the First Amendment.
Making videotaping of chickens and cows being tortured by these big agri conglomerates and exposing that becoming illegal. The Antifa legislation we mentioned at the beginning. This stuff is on track here, folks. Not to mention the fact that these companies already have their own private intelligence gathering security forces anyways. So, get serious. Gabe from Chicago, Comrade Jamie, still buzzing from the Socialism Conference last week. I'm finally ready to bite the bullet and join the ISO. But before I do, I want to ask you what made you decide to become a member of DSA as opposed to the ISO or any other socialist organization?
Man, that's a pretty good question. I like the ISO. I've got friends in it, and the DSA and the ISO have done a lot of things together in the recent past. I will say the ISO draws a very hard line against participating in electoral politics to do with the Democratic Party. And I think a lot of us in the DSA think that it's possible to occasionally run candidates as Democrats as a tactical move. Also, it's a bigger organization, and that comes with, both pros and cons. But oh man, there's so much to think about here. I mean, they're both good. I would say the ISO is more specific in what they believe, and they're more centralized in terms of their strategy. Everyone kind of, they have democratic centralism. Everyone kind of, they vote on it and then they go out and they all execute it and they all toe the line. Whereas DSA is more decentralized. The individual chapters and branches have a lot more autonomy over what we decide to pursue in different places. And it's more of a big tent that brings together different tendencies within the left, which again, you know, certainly has its problems. I think we're seeing some of those divisions come out in certain debates we're having right now. But I think whatever organization you join, I applaud you.
Whatever you do, do it with passion. Are you about to do?
Oh my God.
We had the
That's
same.
good. And
whatever you do, just do it with passion.
And I think we can work together on some stuff. So, mazel tov.
Yeah,
Nice.
join organizations.
Yeah, join organizations and find out where your most effective pressure point is and what you're most personally moved to do. You're calling from a 610 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
It's the sad old man from...
Oh, well, I think sad old man. I don't think we're going to do this today. Time's tight. Bye.
Thank you.
You're calling from a 734 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Jack from Michigan.
Jack, especially in contrast to sad old racist man. Nice to hear you. How are you,
breath of fresh
Jack?
air.
Breath of fresh air. What's going on, Jack?
I don't know. I just like the interview that you did, and
thank you.
I like to add on to that that it would be important for the next Democratic nominee to maybe set some standards for when they set what are those things called, bonds that they give to scientists to
Grants, you mean?
Create new objectives.
I think that this is definitely an area that that politicians and policymakers need to be looking at. But this is one of the great examples of like this could easily be solved by just republicizing science to get science out of the public sector and especially in this case and back out of the private sector. Especially in this case, I mean this is a great this is actually a very good Harvey K style example because this does not require a global analogy or something to do that's radically different than what we have done before. We literally need to massively fund public science that is committed to open-ended inquiry that yields both important, tangible public health and environmental benefits, as well as yields breakthroughs and discoveries about the nature of literally who we are and the universe we occupy. That's it. And we actually have a history that we can build off of doing that.
Or we should just trust billionaires to use their spare cash to motivate us.
Yeah, no, that's
move us in that
obviously
direction.
much more grounded perspective. And you know the other thing I'd say, Jack, I'm on this FDR kick, and I think it is actually really useful to not throw it's essential to not throw the baby out with the bathwater with FDR, and that would be on certain issues. Not certainly, obviously, there was major problems, but certainly on some issues, like he was on board with the right thing to do with like certain areas of labor as an example. And he was quite explicit about, and he was there, like he would be more analogous, like say the best case scenario, say Bernie's president, and Bernie obviously has real convictions about important justice issues. You are absolutely like the day after a Jeremy Corbyn or a Bernie Sanders becomes leader. I mean, well, hopefully you should already be out in the street anyways, but you're going to need to be like even that much more out in the street when you have somebody who might actually do the right thing. There's no win without mass public pressure. So don't, yes, policymakers should be thinking about this, but we should be thinking about it, and we should be setting the context in which they will govern. Thanks. You have anything else, Jack, before we run?
No, I'm just saying that that I would agree with you that we would definitely have to be thinking about ideas and it's the same thing when I called into the show before about having more of a democratic workplace. You need to have more of a democratic idea place. You need to have more of a democracy, make suggestions to your representatives rather than just having your representatives thinking about it. You provide some ideas as well, and I know liberals got some ideas up their sleeve. Left is best, so let's do it.
Left is best. Jack, I love it. I've always been fond of Jack, and I have to say I think objectively his call qualities are improving. Jack's on point. You're calling from a 301 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What's up?
Hi, this is Matthew from Maryland.
Hey, Matthew, what's going on?
Not much. I'm actually sitting here at work watching them put down some graded aggregate base for construction. But I've been listening to your show for a while, and you guys really have pushed me from being just a general liberal to more of a socialist.
Right.
And I've been thinking about that stuff a lot. I actually cracked my old Marx manuscript off my shelf and read through it.
Sweet.
And I've been thinking a lot about like when you say we need to build a real leftist movement, what that entails.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we really need to look into the assets and liabilities, to use a capitalist term, of both sides of this. Because right now it looks like the capitalists have all the assets,
right?
In not just in terms of money.
Yeah. Ideology.
I also think we can't. Yeah. Well, I think a mistake would be just to try and recoup or recreate what the successes of like the New Deal. I think that trade unionism is a dead end, mostly because they already know how to beat it. And I was actually thinking back to, we should look to the original mutual aid societies back in Victorian England. I think that building social organizations and social groups separate from direct economic need is important, because that helps prevent their subversion. I also think they need to. Well, let me articulate what I'm saying. I think that people need to have a reason to be part of these organizations aside from either strict politics or strict work. They need to want to be there. Kind of like I was thinking, like how the religious right has basically been the shock troops of the right. And that's a social organization that has a very meaningful identity component.
Mm-hmm.
And I shouldn't say we need to use religion, because I think that would be a mistake, but we need to somehow give people like almost like a spiritual calling.
Let me say that. Let me say this. I think, first of all, mutual aid is a really beautiful concept and idea. And I think I'm never going to not be essentially somebody who adopts a and both and approach, because the reality is that the situation is so dire and so dangerous that you need to operate on all fronts. And also, you don't know, these things are not linearly planned. Like, you do need to strategize. You do need to think about what's most effective and what types of organizations you want to, run and how things should work. And there is also just like, the old Mike Tyson quote, like, everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face. Like, there is a way that like you cannot micromanage how this stuff is going to work. So it might be that we don't know what is going to yield the breakthroughs and the successes. So people should be looking at and working in a variety of different models, as long as they're productive and complementary, right? Now, and I would, by the way, I would add, for some people, and this is one of the reasons why I'm not into teenage atheism. I'm sorry. Some people are going to find the motivation to do what you're talking about through religious means. And certainly, if you look and take a global scan of this, there has always been, particularly in a place like Latin America, a religious component of left. Now, the last thing I'd say, though, let me real quick, though, where there's a problem with what you're saying is those unions will change and evolve, and they might be, and they're in a phase now where there's literally both ideologically and pragmatically, they're going to need to be way more radical as just a simple question of survival. But you can never have a left politics of any variety that doesn't have a core workers component, actually precisely because of assets and liabilities. Marx wrote about workers not because he was romanticizing them and not because they were an oppressed identity category. It was literally because that's where the raw power of non-capitalists is. If 30 million people shut down a workflow, that is power. So there is no way of, and there's no way of getting around power and asymmetry, and there's no way of getting around workers' role. So I agree with a lot of what you said, but I fundamentally disagree with anything that would undermine union efforts. It doesn't mean unions can't be critiqued. It doesn't mean unions might not have to evolve. It doesn't mean any of that. But there's no escaping union and worker power ever, period, full stop. There's no way of doing that.
I wasn't actually articulating that there shouldn't be trade unionism in that sense. More of that it needs to be separate from, like, I think that industry, or I think that the Europeans have a better model in which they're more industry-specific unions instead of shop-specific. And I was
I would
arguing
listen to my
specifically that we
last TMBS with, or 2 weeks ago with Chris Maizano. We actually talked about that. And you might be right, but again, it's very, you can't just necessarily, I mean, let's just focus on the basic rebuilding and protection of unions in a post-Janus and destroying of union world before we worry about, I mean, that's a dialectic. How do you reinvent and reform them, but also deal with the fact that they're, literally on their last legs of a bludgeoning of a far-right counter-revolution that started in the early 70s. So,
can I say two things?
Yeah.
I think it's true. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face to some degree. That doesn't mean that we can't learn lessons from history and the various failures and successes and, lots of failures of the workers and wider socialist movements. Also, I think you are speaking to a real need that people have for spirituality and community. And, when Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses, I think a lot of people misinterpret that a little bit. He said it's the heart of a heartless world. Opium, it was medicine. It was medicine for the really shitty conditions that people were in.
Yeah, he wasn't the anti-drug warrior.
No. Marx definitely
Marx was Bill
no
Maher.
drugs.
Marx was like, okay, and if you believe that, okay, then you're not that. Okay. That was called Marx on religion. Okay.
I do think that, religion has been used in very oppressive ways in the past. And I think that the left now really, communist societies like, Stalinist Russia made an attempt to fill that need with basically the Church of Stalin.
Yes, and that was not good.
Had festivals, that was Stalinist festivals at the same time as the old religious festivals were, and it didn't go so well. But I do think going forward,
went horribly.
Like as we all know, the left needs to fill some of these needs that people have. I think for community and the fellowship of humanity and a lot of these things that have in the past manifested as religion, but don't necessarily have to.
Well, I said I shouldn't be based in religion to begin with, mostly because I think religion in America. Oh, sorry, you need to go?
No, actually, you know what? Could you call back? Because I feel like we're getting into a slightly different kind of lane, and I do want to get to as many calls as possible. Please call back again. I really appreciate the call, and I just would like to tell you before we go, you are a main reason why I hung up on Sad Racist Old Man. Because we could have been doing 10 minutes of him being like, you got to read Richard from the Intelligence Journal, and trying to promote racism instead of figuring out what to do about our predicament. So thank you for a smart call.
One last thing before I hang up.
I knew you bastard. You take the compliment. You take the compliment and try to stay on the line. How dare you?
I just graduated with a degree in biology this last semester.
Okay, Marshall
and I'm really
McLuhan.
Sick and tired of people who don't know anything about it. talking about it. So I'm going to go. All right. You guys have a good day.
Please call back again. Thank you. All right, one more call. Then
What do you mean I don't know nothing about it? I read this thing on Quillette.
Right, he said I don't know anything, but I'd refer to an article on Quillette.
Here's 4 scientists that say Sam Harris knows what he's talking about.
There was a letter that said that Charles Murray was right. You're calling from a 505 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep. Yes. Hello, go ahead.
Yes, this is Emmanuel Williams. I'm a Panamanian, and I'm also African American. I'm a United States Marine combat veteran.
Yep.
I was deployed twice to Iraq. I was also banned from your last chat yesterday by Matt, so I want to defend my position today.
This might be a little tight. I don't know about this.
It's related to Marcy Wheeler, I'm assuming.
We don't usually bring YouTube
Make it
drama,
quick,
but
make it
yeah,
quick.
go ahead. Matt is ready. Matt's already in his cocky. Just make it quick. Go ahead.
So I was deployed to Iraq in 0405. I was about 20. I was with COB2. I just wanted to say rest in peace to Warrant Officer Charles G. Rose, First Sergeant Michael S. Barnhill, and Lance Corporal Mark L. Tucker.
I'm not trying to be rude, man, but you got to. I'm sorry. I appreciate that, but you got to make your point, please.
Yes. So my point is, if we're going to cast suspicion on Russia's nerve agent attack, and we don't have any actual information, I went to war over suspicion. A war that when someone calls me a baby killer, I can't defend myself because we killed a minimum of 200,000.
I think you went to war not on I think you went to war. I think you went to war. I think you went to war. I think you went to war based on a lie, not on a suspicion.
Yes.
There was an intentional distortion. Yeah.
But but this is the thing. As a scientist, as someone who is also working on a degree in mathematics and biology and physics, there's such a thing called a scientific consensus. We don't have a consensus on this attack yet. We have suspicion. We have a consensus on the Russia collusion. There's mounting evidence. I agree. Mounting evidence on the collusion.
You're breaking up. You're breaking up. Stay on your phone. Yep.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Now it's better. Go ahead.
Yes, but we have a suspicion over Russia, and in the scientific community, a suspicion means nothing. Once there's a consensus, I'll agree with you 100%. Once there's mounting evidence against Russia, I'll agree with you. 100%.
Okay, I think I take your point. I take your point. I take your point. I take your point. Again, I'm not trying to be rude, but you've actually articulated yourself really well, and I get it, and we do have to keep moving. But
so
Matt's going to respond to you, and then we're going to keep going.
I mean, I banned a lot of people yesterday, and I said I'm going to ban anybody who's making.
I'm permanently banned, by the way.
No, I'll fix that.
Permanently banned.
I was actually going in to fix that. And if your reservation is related to the nerve agent attack, Sam did bring that up with Marcy, and she said why she suspected it, and that's her credibility. We can see what happens with that. So I think that's fair. But
Yes.
let me say
I'm
why.
just saying we could look at Duma as well.
No, let Matt make his point. Let Matt make his point.
But the only reason I blocked you is because there was everybody saying a bunch of dumb shit about her credibility without knowing who she was, and I wasn't going to tolerate that in the chat yesterday.
No one knows who I am.
All right, man. I appreciate the call. Yeah. So that was the objection was not the point you articulated well today. It's attacking her credibility. I get that. Thanks for the call. You'll be unblocked. All right, let's do some sound. Okay. Are we starting with how to do something or how not to do something? Are we starting with a friend or an enemy? A friend across the pond or an enemy across the pond? Okay. This is a woman. Her name is Ash. Is this on the sheet? No, it's not. Ash Sarkar. She's a left-wing journalist and media personality in the UK. I've actually had some recommendations from the TMBS Discord to have her on TMBS, so we do that. We follow each other on Twitter. That might happen. I've known of her work. She does good work. I didn't know that she was going to make a wave by smacking around that smug, less than mediocre Trump shill prick, Piers Morgan. here she is, and this is the quintessential concern troll about Trump. Why? First of all, I don't care. Even from a left critique perspective, yes, the critique, it has to be deeper than abolish ICE. There needs to be a structural wind down of the war on immigration. That's absolutely true. Conversely, I don't care if you weren't protesting Obama. I'm glad you're protesting today. Let's build off of that. That's from a left perspective. From a reactionary, disingenuous perspective, they use the same talking point to be like, why not Obama? And Piers is going to run up, actually, I have to say, ironically, into a buzzsaw of logic.
So where will you be marching in the next 2 days?
I'll be marching in Westminster tomorrow alongside thousands of other people who found the policy of border separations unconscionable.
Yep.
Who think that the sight of our elected Prime Minister holding Donald Trump's hand is an utter embarrassment.
Did you find Obama deporting
wish
3 million people unconscionable? You
Yes.
split up many families.
Yes, I did, and that's why.
Where was your protest march against that when he came to the country?
And that's why I also
But if you feel so
protest-
strongly
and that's
about
why
it,
I
Ash,
also protest
where was your
detention and
protest march
deportation
against Obama?
in this country
If you found
as
that
well.
unconscionable too,
You do
where
not
was the march?
have to go out and march
double
against
standards.
everything in order to make a point about one thing.
No, if you find them both
His
unconscionable
co-host hates
and
him.
it's the same
Just
issue,
wrong.
you have to march twice, don't you?
I would actually encourage you to maybe check out some of the other work that I've done where I've been intensely...
Tell you what I'd do, Ash. I'd go and check out some basic facts about your hero, Obama.
He's
and
not
then
my
see
hero.
how
I'm a
heroic he
communist,
comes
you
across. You didn't plan any protests against him, did you? Zero protests against Obama.
Jesus!
You have every right to protest.
Every right to protest. Just get it in perspective. There were none against Obama. There were none against Vladimir Putin.
Why didn't you go out and march against Obama then if you're so keen
manning
to
your
protest
guest
against
to
him?
make up for your own incompetence as a journalist?
Sorry.
You didn't hold Trump adequately to account when you interviewed
Yes,
him.
I did.
You didn't think that climate change was
I held
important
Trump,
enough to bring up.
I
You
held
thought
Trump
you'd ask him
very
to
well
manage
to
your
account
favourite
on a
football
number of
team.
issues.
It's embarrassing.
Well, it may be
and
embarrassing.
instead what you've done,
May be embarrassing to you, Ash, but actually,
is strawman your guest,
what I
put
try and
words
be,
in my mouth,
what I try and be
and
with,
you've deflected
Yes,
from the
thank you.
actual argument at hand.
What I try and do is be fair about Trump. What you do
And to no one
is
else.
be relentlessly anti-Trump and relentlessly pro somebody like Obama.
I'm not pro-Obama. I've been a critic of Obama.
Me.
I'm a critic of the Democratic
doesn't
Party
wash.
because I'm literally a communist.
That's so good.
So good.
And look, Piers Morgan is an embarrassment, a hack, an asshole of exceedingly minimal talent, and his co-hosts really seem to not like him. I don't know what kind of P-tape he has that he even has this gig. That could be my only guess. But his whole brand, I mean, he obviously resents and hates the fact that he failed out of the United States, which we just like hand out TV shows like friggin' trinkets to any British person that comes over here. So Piers Morgan is strikingly untalented to not succeed here.
Shout out James Corden.
Yeah,
shout out James Corden. And
The bar is lol.
The bar is
LOL.
Indeed. And he's built a brand for himself as the concerned troll fascist Trump defender in the UK. But that is the tactic that all of these idiots will use. It's actually funny because sometimes when I go on one of these like global networks like I-24, they'll pair me against some fascist talk show host from Florida or something. And what's funny is that these scum are actually like, yeah, we need to send the military in and destroy families. And it's horrifying and it's disgusting and it's extremely honest because it's exactly like that is the policy of the Republican Party. That is the policy of kidnapping children and doing an extortion and terrorism campaign of families. That is the authoritarian, racist, conspiratorial, morally bankrupt, grotesque mindset and ideology that drives it. But the high end, the wine track obscuring is this. Why not Obama? Why not that? Why not? And it's not, again, a left perspective is going to need to actually, it's funny, the first step was to make abolish ICE a thing. The second step is going to be, what's your policy on amnesty? What's your policy on pathways to citizenship? What's your policy on, and by the way, let's make this distinction. The goal for me is to work towards a borderless world. That's a noble and correct goal. The policy start is demilitarize the border. You can have a border that's not militarized. And that is a necessary and immediate policy step that I want to hear from 2018 candidates and from people who will defeat Trump in 2020. So he's doing the opposite. He's doing the right-wing obscuring and concerned trolling and word games to try to undermine the correct moral position that Ash is advocating for. And then she responded in the right way. You're an idiot. You're a fucking moron. And I'm out here actually trying to do something while you're just trying to lie, obscure, and waste everybody's time on TV. You're an idiot.
Yeah, it reminds me of that Twitter meme that's been going around. It's like a clip from a kung fu movie. And it's like, oh, when a right winger has to argue with an actual leftist, because like they just have no even frame of reference for us.
They haven't rehearsed those conversations.
Yeah, they haven't. They don't have the same like two sentences running over and over again in their heads for us. They're going to have to come up with something new. So rhetorically and on the battlefield, you can only fight the far right with the left, and that's what I maintain.
That reminded me of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez interview with CNN that she did, where there were these sort of roadblock questions that she was thrown, and she had answers to them because she wasn't just a normal, boring Democrat liberal. And I mean, this was even a much more stark example, I think.
Exactly. Now, I want to transition from this. We're going to stay in the UK, and we're going to do one of our regular, we call them First Amendment appreciation segments. Because we actually are ardent defenders of free speech on this show, and take it very seriously, in fact, in terms of reality. And some people go like, but no, you said the college students to have a right to protest, so you're opposed to free speech. Well, actually, no. I support the speaker's right to free speech as well as the response right to free speech. That's called free speech.
And there are laws against assault, and there's also civil disobedience.
Indeed. And there's no legal mandate that you speak in a non-interrupted, non-challenged way. People can debate you. Obviously, I've criticized a lot of campus tactics that I think are counterproductive, but I certainly think that if Charles Murray shows up to your campus, he should either be ignored, or if you're going to show up, you should challenge him. And if Ben Shapiro shows up, you should read excerpts of one of his novels or ask him about the puberty process.
Oh, man.
So that being said, let's go to a guy named Maajid Nawaz for our First Amendment Appreciation Day. Now, Maajid Nawaz was somebody that several years ago people would tell me, like, you really should take a look at him because he's got a really valid perspective, and he's not an ex-Muslim, and he's a Muslim, but he collaborates with Sam Harris, and blah, blah, blah. Now, my impression of Maajid Nawaz was always that he basically was just like a sort of wafer-thin, very basic thinker who had an interesting brand niche because he was essentially doing an Ein Hershey Ali while still claiming a Muslim identity and collaborating with Sam Harris. And I also, again, I'm sorry, I know people really don't like when I do this, but I am familiar with people who actually do work in the Middle East and Pakistan, and even serious academics here who are quite involved in the struggles against religious fanaticism, right-wing politics, monarchies in the Middle East, as well as abuses in a place like Pakistan that are involved. You know, Asma Jahangir was a great hero who died recently, in fact, in Pakistan. Great human rights advocate and advocate in Pakistan. So I didn't think that this sort of, pundit who did talking tours with Sam Harris had anything terribly interesting or distinct to say. And then also he freaked out at me once because I think I indirectly criticized him in a clip or something. I don't recall. The Southern Poverty Law Center, I think, made a mistake by putting him on their hate list or something. I forget what exactly they did. And then I think they really overcorrected that mistake by apologizing and giving him a ton of money. Sort of the quintessential liberal polls of mistakes there.
It's some free speech, not quite free speech.
Yeah, but that would kind of be the point.
Exacting a cost for speech.
Yeah, it seems to me that you could certainly and rightly challenge the hell out of them for doing that, as you should. And in fact, I'd support you because even though I have no respect for Maajid Nawaz's work, I would never put him in that category, and it was inappropriate of them to do so. But I do think, and especially on top of, isn't Jordan Peterson, isn't he putting a lawsuit
yeah,
forward?
him and Lindsay Shepard are suing the Canadian university.
I just find it very interesting that it would seem to me that if you were a true ardent free speech advocate, you would, first of all, you would not want to operate in the British system. You'd want to operate in the American system, and you would save any type of action like that for a just absolute pure, it's something that is so beyond the pale that it is not even arguable in a public forum. The Peterson and Shepard case is crazy and hypocritical. Majid actually had a better case to make if being put on a hate list, but still, I would say not exactly in keeping with a liberal ethos.
If I was a truth teller, that maybe my focus, and I truly believe this was true, that say Islam was pathologically murderous, or there's a racial IQ gap, I would probably expect some heat just given what's happened historically, and I'd be like, look, guys, I understand your concerns about these things, but I have to follow the truth. And instead, you just get whiny bitchiness.
You get whiny bitchiness. You come like, I'm just going to follow the suit. Oh, my God, how could you call me a racist? How could you call me this? Well, I don't know, because you're in racist and bigoted traditions. That's why people call you it. So that's pretty obvious. But this to me just really lays bare, and I don't think, I get these kind of dumb sort of like, yeah, what about Majid or whatever. I'm sorry, I know I'm mispronouncing his name. I apologize. Which, by the way, is interesting. This will be probably the only time that people in this cohort ever acknowledge that racism exists, when somebody who's critiquing them can't pronounce the name correctly. So
say something about Ayan Hirsi Ali on Twitter.
So I do apologize, but I'm also going to reserve a little bit more words like racism for things like promoting scientific racism than not being a master of name pronunciation. You pedant, annoying, mediocre pricks. And here is him on Sky News, Nawaz, really just in the full circle completion that so many of these people go through, to the kind of contrarian bullshit, to the dark web nonsense. And here we are, concern troll, indirect Trump apology tour.
I do worry sometimes, and I protested the whole travel ban because he called it a Muslim ban, and I was outraged. I do worry sometimes that we are
upheld, by the way.
Yeah, I know, and I've been speaking against it. But I do worry sometimes that we are also in danger of not giving credit where credit is due. Now, on the subject of North Korea, on the subject of bombing ISIS when it was needed with 0 casualties inflicted, but especially on the subject of the economy. Did you know, for example, I'm rather impressed by this, African-American unemployment is at lowest since 1970 what?
But why?
Okay,
Wait,
1972.
Because I don't think that's his legacy. I think that's the legacy of the previous administration.
Most
economists say that he can't take credit for that.
Why weren't those?
Right. So basically, like, what he's doing here, incidentally, a couple of weeks after, nodding along to Sam Harris's ahistorical, continued, and now, of course, whiny bitch, personally aggrieved defense of the bell curve, he is going off on the only talking point Trump has that isn't, in fact, overtly or covertly racist when he talks about African Americans, which is this employment gap. Now we basically see that it follows a lot of patterns that you might expect. It actually spiked in the 80s, where there was another actually war on the social safety net and on austerity, and particularly racialized attack on African Americans under Reagan. It started to dip in the 90s. It reached a very low point in 2000, which made sense because even though it wasn't built in a durable way, there was an economic boom under Bill Clinton. And then it I think it might, reflected the dynamics of Bush. It tipped up. And then, wow, yeah, it really spiked around 2009 and 2010. I wonder what happened at that point. I wonder what major economic event, which, of course, I know it's very petty to introduce things like the 2008 economic meltdown into a conversation about ideas, right, guys? Sorry to be so grubby as to mention like actual reality in a conversation with anybody.
Gosh, you want to bring up the past all the time.
Yeah, right. Wait, you're talking about actual things that happened? You're such a SJW should be the intellectual dark web main talking point. So then it spiked up, and then it actually starts precipitously falling under the last several years of the Obama administration. And now it's continuing as
trend has-
every other trend, by the way, which started under Obama, and the recovery has continued under Trump. Now, stipulate, we can dig into these numbers and critique them and get at real unemployment rates, structural inequality, the fact that the gains from the recovery have gone over 90% to the top 1%, the fact that corporations are holding cash reserves, the real critiques that we need to deal with. But on the level of a basic shitbird trying to spin for Trump on Sky News, that graph should do the trick. And I would like to thank everybody for participating in this First Amendment segment.
Yeah,
Thank you.
any charitableness I had toward Majid is completely gone after he makes that case, because that is like basically, if you know anything about economics, you know that trend has been continuing, and basically this is Trump taking credit for not reversing it.
Right. I haven't completely destroyed what was already happening, as I have on so many other areas. And by the way, even that idiotic spin right there of, I don't know what his position on the ban is, but if his position was that he would support what it became, which is we're going to say it's not a Muslim ban, but we're banning people from certain countries. I don't know what his position is, but he didn't say, in that clip at least, I oppose a ban full slap. He said, I opposed it. I was outraged because it was called a Muslim ban. I don't know what that means. If you ban people from Somalia or Yemen, but you don't call it a Muslim ban, are you cool with that? I would like further clarification.
One thing we know he's not cool with is the thing about not giving credit. The worry that you don't give credit where credit is due. Well, I'm sorry. Like, if they're fascists, I don't really give a shit if I'm not giving them proper credit. And that goes for the black unemployment rate. Because I think, frankly, like, he should be more concerned about giving credit where it's not due.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all just... There was a great... piece in the New York Review of Books recently about Majid and Ayn Hirsi Ali and how they exist in this whole ecosystem of, essentially people promoting all sorts of destructive ideas to essentially minority communities and the games they play around that and the sort of weaving in and out of identity depending on the context. And yes, you do see it with their follow. It tweets from people who will bend like, you calling the Supreme Court validating the Muslim ban as white supremacist, hysteria much? You don't agree with everything Ayn Hirsi Ali has ever said about Islam? You are a sexist racist.
Well,
Sam Harris is just being honest about the stats. Black people are like fucking animals, and they just need to have an honest conversation. You didn't accept uncritically everything that Majid Nawaz said about Islam? You are a bigot. What I love about these people is that when they're not defending racism and bigoted ideas with horrific intellectual and policy histories, they're actually enacting the most literally essentialist SJW bullshit, which is you cannot disagree with somebody because of their identity, which is actually the most condescending, essentialist, non-human, ridiculous caricature, which I disagree with categorically from anybody who states that position anywhere where they are in politics. I just happen to see it all the time for people on the right who want their ambassadors to be used as a cudgel to avoid any conversation or analysis. It's fucking disgusting.
Well, they think they're beating us at our own game when they do that.
That's
right?
not my game.
Like, don't they
I don't
always
play that shit.
Yeah, but they think that it is because they collapse together,
Right.
liberals and leftists, and
Right.
the SJW
That's
left with the actual left, and they always do it with a bit of a smirk. So yeah, it's.
I
shitty.
respond
It's stupid.
with also a bit of a smirk.
I actually got in trouble with the Quillette, which is a
Very
eugenicist
dangerous.
publicizing organization out of Australia that sometimes defends IDW guys.
Right.
And I said Ayan Hirsi Ali's credibility comes from identity politics,
Which is objectively true.
Objectively true. And
Right.
actually, I think her lived experience is the one thing about her that makes her interesting.
The one thing not to critique about Ayn Hirsi Ali is her personal biography, personal courage, and life trauma. The most important, credible part about her.
Mhm.
Not her right-wing shilling and mediocre analysis of politics and fear-mongering.
What was the shooter in Norway?
Yes,
Breivik.
yes.
She's like, Breivik had run out of options because of a politically correct society didn't afford him any opportunities to react against the Islamic hordes, basically.
That's what Bill Cosby should have said. I ran out of options because girls wouldn't let me knock them out because of political correctness. Oh, it's all such nonsense. I mean, guys, come on. Do better. It's pathetic. You're calling from a 303 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, I'm Ben from Denver.
Hey, Ben, what's going on?
Oh, I wanted to talk about the mask stuff you were talking about earlier.
The Dan Donovan bill to target Antifa in the House. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Well, like I remember when you mentioned that there are a few states in the union, well now the union, that have mask laws already, and they were implemented to ban the KKK from using masks initially. So like there's a history of this, not nationally but locally.
Right.
And so that's something to think about. And the other thing I thought about
why?
is
What
does this
how
do
is that
for-
to think about in terms of what's happening now?
Well, I just mean it in the sense that, I'm not sure if any of these, this could mean that is technically legal, because I'm not sure if any of these laws have been challenged yet, in the Supreme Court.
I don't know the status of that, but I'll tell you what.
So
I mean, first of all, we know that
it's wrong. It's totally wrong.
It's wrong, and also,
fucked up. That's
and also, it's funny. If the right to preserve people being out doing important things to fight for democracy and against racism means that some scumbags can wear their silly outfits in a public march, then yeah, that's what it means.
No, I agree
yeah,
with you. If that's what it takes, because I don't want some fucking Klansman coming to my house and blowing me away because he found me on Facebook or some shit.
Right, exactly. Right.
But and the other thing I just thought, kind of as a humorous note, is what does this do for Halloween? You have a bunch of 10-year-olds showing up to your house in disguises saying, "Give me candy or I'm going to fuck your house up."
Right. That was a good Curb Your Enthusiasm episode about this. Remember Larry David, he goes, trick or treat. That's a threat.
Yeah, the bald asshole episode.
Right, exactly. It's a classic.
But yeah, and the other thing is you're right about these laws about just general repression. I remember in Colorado when a few months ago they had their little teacher walk. They had the teacher walkout. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have called it.
No, whatever. Yeah, go ahead.
It was pretty big.
Yep.
But they a Republican who looked as Republican as you could get tried to get a bill introduced in the state house to ban public employees from going on strike and to jail them if they do.
Yep.
So it's a growing problem across the country. So yeah.
Appreciate the
call,
But that's
all
man.
I had this time.
No, that's really helpful. Thanks. You, man. Appreciate it. You're calling from a 302 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Michael.
Hey.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hey, what's up? This is Dave in Delaware.
Hey, Dave. What's going
on? First of all, racist old man.
Yes.
Go outside.
Yeah,
get
go
some
outside.
sunshine.
Get some air. You have a limited amount of time on this earth. Do you really want to just be a sad, racist old prick calling into radio shows?
For real.
Try to call your
and
family
I can
up.
hear the basement in your voice.
I know.
The basement.
It's actually
accent
really quite depressing.
Honestly, we do get depressed when he calls it.
Yes, it's a
Well,
bummer.
I'm getting some feedback here.
Oh, okay. Well, go ahead.
The main reason I was calling was to address something that Dave about maybe about a week ago.
Who?
Regarding Dave from Jamaica.
Oh, Dave from Jamaica. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, he had called about trying to talk to people who are having a hard time with the idea of extending just like basic human dignity to everyone through, social programs and stuff like that. And
I lost you, Dave.
That particular problem.
I'm sorry, I lost you.
Can you hear me?
You're going in and out.
Yeah,
now
be
I can
brief
hear you.
if you can make it quick.
Yeah, just make it real quick.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to say, if you want to try to make the case to people that are on the fence about that sort of thing, just let them know, if it's a matter of money, even though I think that's a ridiculous argument. But if it's a matter of money to them, just let them know, there's only so much you can do before you end up spending more money on trying to fix the problem than the actual problem that you're perceiving.
Right.
Like, if, I mean, just think of it like a retail store that sets up like, security gates and stuff like that.
Right.
There's only so much money that they're going to
insulate
spend.
your home to save money on heat in the winter. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you. You are calling from a 509 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Michael, this is Democratic Socialist in the streets, deontological libertarian LeBron James in the sheets, Ronald Reagan.
Ronald Reagan. Always great to hear from you. How are you?
A few years ago, did you see that TMZ video of LeBron James leaving the club with 4 girls and he yells out, "Invisible hand, bitch"?
No, I didn't see that video, but that's awesome.
Do you remember that?
No, I don't. That's amazing.
Is he referring to the invisible hand of the market that was redistributing women up to him?
Yes.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a free market of sex or something.
Exactly. What LeBron said was precise.
I'm looking on YouTube and I'm only able to find LeBron James curves woman and gives her to his friend, so I'm still looking.
I think you're joking. That didn't actually happen. Yes.
Yeah, that
did not.
That's not a real video. That's not a real video. But
Reagan knows how to sell it.
I love the Jordan Peterson thing because it's so clearly a guy who's projecting whatever weird sex experience he had in college onto like society as a whole.
Jersey Chasers.
Like he had a roommate who was like on the college football team and like he couldn't get laid, and now he's like in his 50s and can't get over it, and this is just a problem of all of society.
His name was Deshaun Williams. They called him DW, and he got all of the ass in the world while I was sitting and crying about the individual. So that is the one area where you basically need total redistribution. You know what
Women
else
will
is-
sleep with these men who, if you think about it, they aren't even the starting quarterback, okay? I mean, really, that's the problem.
He played defense off the bench, and he's still getting so much pussy.
They think it's going to make him happy in the short term, and maybe in the very, very short term, it makes him very happy indeed.
It's like flashback Jordan Peterson, like masturbating. His roommate is like having an orgy.
Like that.
You're like, maybe this is short-term happy.
That Chappelle show.
Yeah, like the Chappelle show. Also, the real world, except it's Jordan Peterson.
Also, Jordan Peterson totally got a boner over a trans woman at some point in time and really just freaked the fuck out about it. And he's had a real hate on for trans women ever since.
They're like, hey, that was charity.
No, yeah.
That was charity. You know what's going on there, right,
A
dude?
pity boner?
Charity, what? Oh, no. What have I done? Hold me back. Hold me back, the individual.
Is directly pulled from his person. Like the whole thing about not being able to slap a woman. There was he had that something.
Well,
from his,
you should say you
from
speculate.
college, for
You
sure.
speculate because some people out here respect the First Amendment less than we do. So it's all speculation.
We have the first. If we were in Canada, we couldn't say that, but we're in America.
No, I know, but I'm just bending over backwards to practice civility. So I would speculate 3 things about Jordan Peterson. It was real world in terms of watching his roommate have sex is my speculation, my guess. I don't know. I have no evidence, but I'm guessing. Number 2, I would guess that he popped a boner for a transgender person named Charity in the 90s, and that freaked him the fuck out. Number 3, I would speculate that he tried to smack a woman once, but she knocked him out with Tybo. And it was very sad.
I know the problem with marriage is you enter into this contract with a woman in college who's willing to do things that you can't even understand, and then 20 years later, it's like, when was the last time she did that thing with her tongue? And this is the problem with society, if you think about it.
Where did she learn that?
Referring directly
Where did she learn
to my
that?
personal experience, but more broadly to society in general.
Oh my God! Do you remember? Sorry, go ahead.
No, I'm done.
No.
I can't do it.
You need to do more. Do you remember Best in Show? Did you guys ever see that Christopher Guest movie, Best in Show? And you remember the guy with the club foot? I forget the actor's name, but the recurring gag is that like his wife has slept with like everybody. So they just go to like a restaurant. The waiter's like, "You look familiar," and she's like, "Oh yeah." I think you do too. And she's always like super into it. And they just like, they travel across the country and it just like grows and grows and grows to like the premise. And it's like, maybe that's like Jordan Peterson on a tour. The comedic scenario of Jordan Peterson having that experience is amazing.
All right. I'm done. I'm out of here.
Thank you, Ronald Reagan. You're calling from an 860 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, is this me?
Yep.
Hello?
Hey, you're on. You're on.
Hey, I'm at work, so I'm just trying to get a place that's more quiet. This is Lindsay from Brooklyn. Thanks so much. This is my first time calling, so it's pretty exciting.
Thank you for calling.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple things. One, really appreciate that you guys highlighted that clip with Joe Rogan talking about Jordan Peterson. I still can't for the life of me understand why anybody takes him seriously.
Bad
I
public
tried
education.
To find his clip, and I couldn't, and I didn't want to listen to the whole thing. So that was great. I love how you guys just tear him apart. And then another thing, too, that I wanted to mention was Dan Donovan. He represents Staten Island, but he also represents a part of Brooklyn as well.
Right, you're right.
Right. Bay Ridge. That's the
Bay
area
Ridge,
that I'm in. Yeah. And it's, I don't know the demographics of the area too well because I'm fairly new to the area. But I think it's very similar to Staten Island, where it's just like a lot of very Trumpian sort of people. And I'm very
but a
curious to
big
see how-
influx of a Muslim community there as well. So it's actually
That's
a really
true.
paradoxical district. Yes, there's a lot of South Asian, a lot of Arab, and then and it was actually a district. That actually, in a funny way, as far as I understand, Bay Ridge was like, it was unusually Republican, certainly for Brooklyn. Definitely big Trump turnout. But conversely, Bernie did great there in the Democratic primary. So it does kind of reflect that sort of paradox. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm very curious to see how these midterms will go. The Justice Democrats guy did not win for the Democratic primary, but a guy named Max Rhodes won instead. He looks like he's pretty good.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm hoping that we can maybe turn it blue.
People need to vote Democratic in 2018.
Yeah.
There's no, I'm sorry. There's zero, pure popular front voting. Now, there might be, definitely candidates that are, not worthy of more than voting for, right? But you need to make sure, I'm sorry. Pretty soon we're going to have to start doing are you registered segments? Do you know your district?
Mm-hmm.
You got to vote. It is imperative that happens. So we'll see. I think actually it's a pretty tough district for a Democrat. It's kind of the one Republican district, but there's a lot of energy and people should get on it. I appreciate the call. Thank you so much. Please
thank
call
you
back
so much.
again.
I also heard the other day from a member of the DSA's electoral working group that our recent campaign in that district for Qadir El-Yatim, who was a real progressive guy. So people were calling him like the Bernie Sanders of Brooklyn or whatever. He didn't win, but they did get a lot of interest over the course of canvassing from people in these issues, people from the Arab community, people not from the Arab community, and a lot of people ended up joining DSA as a result.
Which, by the way, another great argument for electoral engagement because it's a greenhouse and incubator. It's also just an excuse to talk to people and engage them on everything. Because if you're coming from a DSA or even a Justice Democrat or an Arab Revolution perspective, you're going to that door and you're not just saying, to, vote for a candidate. You're talking about voting for a candidate in the context of a much broader drive to deal with the problems of our society and make things better. And that engages people.
Yeah,
in a broader project.
That is how we always try to do it. But that said, people also do notice when you only go talk to them when somebody is running.
Well,
so it really needs to be an all the time kind of thing.
No doubt. You're calling from a 701 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Melody from Washburn, North Dakota.
Okay. Hello. Wow.
I've been to Washburn.
Oh, fucking A, dude.
There's a Lewis and Clark Interpretive Center there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
What's on your mind, buddy?
Well, I was calling because I really liked the interview today, and I kind of wanted to talk about what is the problems with capitalism and science that I remember from when I was in college.
Yeah.
One of the things is a lot of research requires certain materials, like in biotech, which I studied.
Yeah.
It was media. And there are a lot of the best options they're patented, so you can only use them, and use it for research if you buy it.
Right.
So otherwise you have to make your own, which is basically something that is common use.
Right.
No patent.
Right.
And that.
Yeah, that already. Yeah, right. No, I mean, intellectual property regimes are very dangerous to innovation in art and science. And then it's amazing because unfortunately the kind of first wave of critiques of intellectual property were harnessed by the tech platforms to actually create new incentive structures to not pay people for their products. So it's a very tricky double-edged sword, but it is a real problem in science. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you. You are calling from a 732 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Alex from Edison. How are you guys?
Can you try back? I just can't hear you well. I'm sorry.
Is that better?
That's better. Where are you calling from? What's on your mind?
I'm calling from Edison, and what's on my mind, I don't like the way guys racist man.
Sorry, I can't hear you, man. Try back. Sorry about it. You're calling from a 720 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Alex, and I'm from Colorado.
Hey, Alex, what's going on?
I'm just kind of looking for some guidance, like, the algorithm god saved me from the abyss of the intellectual dark web.
Thank God.
And, yeah, and you guys are my saviors.
Sweet.
So, yeah, I don't know.
She got a tattoo of me.
Like,
what? Hell yeah.
Yeah, she got a tattoo of me that says smug.
Yeah, that hell yeah was for the caller, just to be clear, not for the tattoo of Michael.
Oh, boo. Get the fuck out of here. All right, get back to tell us. No, but what else did you? I am, of course, really glad to hear that because that's a positive thing for our country and culture.
That's sort of why we're doing it.
That's also. Right, precisely. So, anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was wondering if you knew Fred Monton and like the Undercommons.
No, I'm not familiar with that. What is that? Who is he?
Oh, you should check that out. It's like he's this poet who's pretty dope and kind of talks about how like academics and people should kind of take advantage of the system that's taken advantage of them.
Right.
Like going to college to like, and just like utilize every single resource that they can like sap up from it.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess the guidance that I was looking for is I'm like wondering what I can do. I'm thinking about going back into college, and I don't know, the interview that you guys had earlier today kind of, it gave me some, some thought about maybe I should, maybe I shouldn't. Like, I'm thinking about doing like a sociology PhD.
You're thinking about getting a PhD in sociology?
Yeah.
What are you doing now?
Nothing. I'm like unemployed, and I just graduated from college with a music degree. So like, I don't know. And like, I'm really inspired by Nathan J. Robinson.
Yep.
Have you?
Sure. Yeah, I've interviewed him on Michael Brooks' show. Yep.
Yeah. I think I watched that one.
Yep.
And like, I don't know, I'm just really inspired by the way that he writes, and like, I kind of want to like go in that direction in my life and
start writing.
I was thinking like, yeah, like start writing.
I mean, honestly, I just want to stipulate that I'm not like, and this is this is just a reflection of my own humility and limits. I am definitely not going to give people like I'm not. Yes, go to college. Don't go to college. Like
Yeah,
I'm not gonna give major life advice to people over the phone. But I would say a basic thing, not something big like deciding whether or not to get a PhD, which you should think about and weigh carefully. I actually do think there is something to some of that, just sort of like, kind of like success woo or whatever the fuck mindset when it comes to like things like, if you want to write. If you want to like be involved in, creative endeavors, you gotta start doing it. And I also think that you can reach out to people, you can share your work. There's actually a fair amount of helpful and encouraging people out there, and a lot of ways that people have been able to carve work for themselves in these spaces. It always does seem to be a kind of, I mean, first of all, undoubtedly there's a huge amount of nepotism and luck. That's real. And then what you have control over, it does seem on the other hand that it's like, if you do work incredibly hard on your craft and you kind of put yourself in the right environments, things happen, and that's doable, and you have control over that. So I would get to it. If you're interested in writing, start writing.
What topic do you think?
I can't tell you that.
Would be a good place to start?
Whatever you know about and care most about, that's it. You can't work it backwards like that. If something pissed you off, and pretend you're writing an email to a friend about something that really made you angry or something that really inspired you, and just bang it out. That's it. You got to trust your instincts on it. You can't game it out intellectually, at least in my experience.
And like from a practical standpoint too, I know there are a lot of grants and funds available for PhD programs. Some fields more than others, probably, but the financial aspect is not unimportant unless you are, independently wealthy, which it sounds like you're not, because you said you don't have a job. But I know people who've done it, and like it is not an easy life. I know people who've stuck with it. I know people who didn't. And, I want everyone to follow their passion, but also don't blame yourself if you are struggling financially, because this is a widespread problem and it is affecting everybody in the field. Like my husband, Sean, for instance, he had most of a master's degree and he was going to go into a PhD program. And then he had a moment where he's like, I don't want to be broke for the rest of my life. And he got a job in the building trades instead. And then he's got friends who did stick with it, and it's been very hard for them, but also very rewarding. So at the end of the day, it's up to you to decide, obviously.
Yeah, I was in a similar situation. I graduated, I went to grad school at NYU for a master's degree in media, culture, and communication. I was unemployed for a period after that, or underemployed. And I am glad that I have not continued on a PhD yet, but I also think like I might do it later when I know exactly what I want to do. The main problem is, I think, the financial thing. It's like, do you want to basically be indentured to banks after you get done with your degree? And if that's fine with you, like I am paying a lot of student loans, but it's worked out in my case. But I wouldn't take that as, I am lucky in a lot of ways too. So,
I also would say to you, and this goes, it's the dialectic of personal versus social. Like the social outline that Jamie gave you is totally right. And on the other hand, you got to also be in your own individual and grounded, reality, and make your decisions that make the most sense. I mean, it's certainly like, in a way, I grew up so financially deprived, like actual financial poverty, that it was like, it was not helpful, but it was terrible, but in certain ways it helped sort of like streamline some of these things. Cause there was in some ways like, I was already used to such deprivation that it was sort of just like a focus on upwards. like period, right?
Yeah,
and
like
a ruthlessness and a ruthlessness about it, which is important. But on the other, but I would say, and in that spirit, like I got to be honest, and you know, people like some people I think, you know, scoff at this and get all judgy, which I'm just simply not about a fair amount of work. But I know some people who have gone an academic route always were thinking of how, particularly if they were doing something like sociology or politics, could they leverage what they were studying for research consulting work, and you know, and still picking their clients and not doing stuff for like, you know, evil corporations or whatever, but recognizing that like those skill sets can actually be very much in demand in the private sector, and that's a good material way to meet your needs. So you should also be thinking about that. Definitely, if you follow that track. I appreciate the call, man. I hope you call in again. Thank you. And start writing.
Yeah.
You're calling from a 647 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Just give me a minute to get to a better spot.
Maybe not a minute.
All right. Hey, so this is Nick from Canada calling.
Hey, what's going on?
And I just wanted to talk a bit more about how academia is very much a neoliberal system. In particular, I wanted to focus on how academic science relies on the exploitation of labor. So, bit of a background, finished my PhD in science a couple of years ago. As a grad student, you know, I'm making about $20,000 a year. Poverty line, where I'm from, is about $22,000. Work expectation is about 80 hours a week. You know, so if you average that out, works out to about 40% of minimum wage. You know, somehow this is legal. But then really in, science research lab, it's really the grad students and, the postdocs who are doing all the actual research. And for the most part, the profs are just, writing the grant proposals and things like that. So I think this, translates just, perfectly well to, how in neoliberal capitalism,
definitely,
the workers do all the work and get none of the money. Yeah. So,
no doubt. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm very familiar. I mean, I'm sorry to hear. I mean, it's disgusting. It's horrible. Your experience reflects, obviously, an unbelievable amount of very exploited graduate students. And yes, it does reflect that reality. And I mean, obviously, I hope you're on the road to where you need to go in an individual case, and then in a macro case, we start to actually address these problems. I appreciate the call, man. I do have to did you have one other quick thing to add? Yeah, we do need to kind of keep it moving.
Yeah, I just want to talk about how, a couple of years into my PhD, our grad student union went on strike.
Right.
Trying to get a living wage for everyone.
Yeah.
The art students are making $12,000 to $14,000, while science students are making like $20,000. But it's kind of horrific what I saw. Lots of these science students didn't want to stand in solidarity just because they're in a relatively more advantageous position.
Right.
And the faculty didn't show us any support whatsoever.
Right.
They're perfectly ready to hire scabs and not help us out. It's a really disgusting system.
Yeah.
Depression and suicide are extremely common. So, it's a lot to think about if you want to get into a PhD.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I hear you.
thanks for taking the call.
I remember seeing
Thank you.
an article in The Guardian not that long ago about homeless professors.
Yep.
Which is just disgusting.
It's all disgusting.
I mean, nobody should be homeless. Let's be clear about that.
But it does seem an absurd elevation from you always hear about homeless students sleeping in libraries and stuff like that. But yeah, like adjunct professors.
Right. What is this, Matt, that you just pulled up? Is this on the sheet?
Paul? No, it's not. It's Paul Manafort's mugshot.
This is my mugshot, and this is what I'm doing, and this is jail. So Paul Manafort going to prison is like one of the only positive thing that's happening right now in the national scene.
Yeah.
People who bitch about the Russia stuff, it's already yielding results.
Yeah, no,
this mugshot.
I re-listened to the episode again.
Yeah.
Yesterday. I found it much easier. Like, it is dense stuff, but
yeah.
I listened to it again, sort of sped up, and that's my way of doing things. And that was a pretty nuts interview.
You listen to that sped up?
I think
Jesus.
Well, yeah, because it's easier for me to follow the threads
without
when they come at me faster.
Yeah.
There's so much in there. I mean, I don't think the Russia stuff is bullshit, although obviously a lot of stupid liberals have been really stupid about it. But it's so overwhelming, and it just makes me feel so powerless. Like, oh God, there's just a deep oligarchic conspiracy here, like very clearly. And I find out about this stuff and I'm like, what am I supposed to do about it? What's going to happen to these people? Maybe something, maybe nothing.
I just think the only position I would take on the Russia thing, and I generally kind of share the perspective that I trust Marcy Wheeler, and she has made me, and I've been reading her for several years. So I started reading her like around the Snowden revelations, and she actually made me think much more intelligently about that. And so she's like very serious about surveillance, national security, state abuse in the United States. So I generally trust her, and she's made me think much more seriously about Russia, and also like Mike Hanna and other like serious journalists have. And so my thing is though, is that I think that there isn't that much we can do about it per se, but I just think, and there is a lot of hype and conspiracy theories and a lot of nonsense that spews about it. But I also think from the perspective of us and shows like this, there was like don't make the, oh, well, I'm not a normie, I am cool, so fuck that story.
I was just going
to say that is just the same cultural posturing that we just need to get away from, period.
Well, and I'll even put it a bit more cynically. Like,
Yeah.
I think the Russia story is not a bad pastime for, let's say the dumber liberals to get really in on. And I don't even want to say dumber. Like,
Don't say dumber.
Keeps them off the street.
I'll say this: like, I was really into like JFK conspiracies, like these sorts of things that like I am interested in, and I agree with Jamie, like, and you, that there isn't a whole lot to do with it. So I think that's why like I often don't like pull clips for it or something like that, because like what do you really want to talk about? We're basically waiting to see an elite process, a process,
right? And this is an example, and there's also an example where there is an elite process to root for. Like, yes. Robert Mueller's any number of critiques I could level at Robert Mueller. Okay, and I understand. I'm annoyed by. No, he's Bobby D on Saturday Night Live. Yes,
I have no faith in him as a person.
Yes, but that's a valid and fine thing to critique. In this context, where we are right now, if you don't see that it would be infinitely better that he puts these motherfuckers in jail, or at the very least deeply destabilizes and undermines the Republican Party,
or exposes their
machinations, that is unendingly important. And yes, they're going to be, and you know what? The liberals who are idealizing the national security state already were. We had this argument with them under Obama. This is like, oh, there's mass NSA surveillance and a totally ungoverned drone program. No problem. Obama's a nice guy. We had this argument for years. In this context, just as I might have disagreements with Antifa, you put that legislation on the table, solidarity with Antifa all day. And then on the complete flip side, to the extent Robert Mueller is giving these people heartburn, solidarity with Robert Mueller. It's called politics.
It's actually like, I think it's useful that there is a sort of popular base of support for the Russia investigation, so that the fascists can't just kibosh it, which is what they would want to they would love to do.
Yes.
And they're trying.
And that has big implications. What did you want to show?
Do we want to dissect this YouGov economist more like Bernie? Do you want the candidates to be more like Bernie or less like Bernie? There's a bunch of info on here, but there's some interesting ones.
I haven't seen this yet, so this is all fresh to me.
I just saw it during the show here.
You take the top lines.
I mean, you can start with a couple. I mean, number one, you look at the racial categories. It's white people who hate Bernie the most.
Right. Basically, do you want Bernie to be a candidate who's more like Bernie Sanders? 30% for whites, 45% for African Americans. Right? No.
I thought you were reading horizontal. You're reading horizontal.
Horizontally, right? 33% for Hispanic and 42% for other.
Oh, and
so
is
there you
this
go.
a
Right.
survey of just Democrats or of everyone?
There is a few crosstabs down there too. So, like on the bottom left corner, there's registered and not registered to vote, and not registered slightly more positive toward Bernie. And then there's also the 2016 vote at the bottom. 62% of Hillary voters want candidates to be more like Bernie. Only 19 want them to be less like Bernie.
And by the way, that is a great look. There's this argument going on the periphery about I want. You might occasionally, bag a Moby Dick and flip a ardent Trump authoritarian to a socialist. It's possible, but in terms of reality, your prime fishing ground for pushing for greater radicalism is liberals. As annoying as they might be, as many disagreements we might have, that shows you 62% of Hillary Clinton voters more like Bernie, 8% of Donald Trump, 64% of liberals, 35% of moderates, 12% of conservatives, and 2% not sure. Liberals are the place.
I think
not just liberals, but people who don't vote as well, who are disproportionately
that's not the
poor.
point I'm making. That's not the point I'm making in this context. In this context, in that specific argument about who to appeal to and who is the most receptive ground for it, and who, by the way, that maybe we should think of being strategic about not alienating, even as we have to critique them, it's liberals. Absolutely non-voters. And I think a fair amount of poor, ultra-oppressed non-voters who are burned out in the process tend to have fairly a left sense that can be tapped into if there's actually an honest momentum.
Yeah, I agree. I think it is interesting that there's evidence that unregistered people are more for Bernie.
That makes total sense to me.
But it's also there's also less of them in this. There are 242 respondents versus 1,200. But the other thing I want to say is I think I said this on TMBS that when you're thinking about sort of liberal centrists,
right?
Like how they come in the crunch, whether they side with fascists or they just stay dumb or they go to the left. I said a third will come to the left, a third will just be idiots in the middle and not comprehend the world, and a third will go with the fascists.
Right.
And literally, if you look at the ideology category on the bottom right, 35% want more like Bernie Sanders, 33 want less, and 33 are unsure.
Precisely.
Wow. Spot on, dude.
Nailed it. Anything else you guys want to pick from this?
I mean, even I feel like Bree was talking about this maybe on your show or maybe on another show. Like, she sort of believed this idea that was spread via loudmouth liberals on Twitter that African American voters just don't like Bernie Sanders. And you can see from the numbers that is not true.
I don't think Bree does not think that at all.
She said that she was surprised
at how much they like them.
Yeah.
Right, but she didn't mean that they hate him. She meant that she was, and specifically in a state, she was talking about going to Alabama, which voting-wise, very heavily in the South, Hillary over Bernie. And so she was surprised specifically in that context.
Yeah, she was surprised to see the immense amount of support, energy, and excitement from, people of all ages and races, but African Americans.
And I think from our perspective, that's what we said the entire primary, too, which is that Hillary's got the advantage because of name recognition.
Yeah, that's it. Racist 9-year-old killed it with the professor this week on TMBS. Blowing my mind as always. Thank you. Moving on, I think that the IDW new goal is to take back the left. Some of them are realizing that the rabid pack of MAGA chuds in their fan base are just a bit too much to stomach. I hope that doesn't work. The left is at a crossroads. Do we want to be a movement for the many or a consulting class of reasoned thought experiments that use public funds for billionaire submarine fantasies? Well, I think you totally captured where that's the Sam Harris side of the dark web. Elon here. Elon Cucks. Elon here, just letting you all know I built a totally useless submarine. I flew it halfway around the world, used social media to insert myself in the biggest international news story for totally non-self-serving reasons. Next stop, Martha's Vineyard, where I'm having tea with Alan Dershowitz. Please buy my cars. You just captured the essence of Elon Musk.
I need to do this history a bit better because I'm not super up on Howard Hughes, but I'm pretty sure he did the same sorts of publicity stunt gambits.
I think so.
Yeah.
At least I think so from the Scorsese DiCaprio movie, right? Which is my historical basis for making that. Exactly.
I hope that Alan Dershowitz drowns in one of Elon Musk's wonky submarines off the coast of Martha's Vineyard and nobody saves him.
That's juicy.
And Elon fails to save him.
And Elon's like, I've got this. And then publicly fails to save him in an extremely embarrassing public manner.
Elon did say, I don't know if I have this readily available.
Wait, he tried to insert himself in the rescuing of the kids that were trapped in the cave in Thailand, right?
Yes, he did that, and then
they were basically like, "Thank you so much, but we're actually sort of doing something here." And his Reddit thread was like, "What the fuck? I hope they drowned because they insulted Elon Musk."
They're like parsing. It was literally like how conservatives reacted to the mayor of Puerto Rico during the hurricane San Juan.
Right. Hey, I mean, cult of personalities are cult of personalities.
But so Musk now has put himself, after like not really helping with the Thai thing, he says he wants to help Flint, and he tweeted out, "Please consider this a commitment that I will fund fixing the water in any house in Flint that has water contamination above FDA levels." No kidding. Now, if that happens, great.
Yeah, if that happens, awesome.
That's a great use of Elon Musk's
then that's
money.
Then that's him doing the right thing. Yeah.
Wasn't there a stat that came out that you could fix the whole problem for like some ridiculously low figure, like $5 million?
I don't know the specific stat, but I'm sure it can be fixed by large government intervention and accountability.
What I'm worried about is, one, does that mean you own the Flint pipes now, Elon?
Right.
And number two, does this also follow for the rest of the cities who also put their pipes in like 70 years ago, which is around the time they start leaching? Because this is not just going to be a Flint problem.
Why doesn't he come out and say, "I'll personally help," and on top of that, there should be a massive increase in my taxes to fund a national infrastructure upgrade so children and people are not poisoned by their tap water.
This is on the
how about that?
This is on the spectrum of Domino's Pizza doing potholes.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that. Even his conception of the problem is like so individualized that he would say like, "I'll fix it in your house," as opposed to like, "Oh, let's fix the whole problem."
Right. Precisely.
He's going to build a widget that you install on your spigot, and then that just fixes it for 2 years while he grabs cash from it.
Precisely. All right, let's do one more clip, and then we'll take one more call and a few more IMs, then we got to run. I tried to get as many. I mean, guys, we get so many calls now that it's just very seldom ever going to happen that we get to all of them. But I did try to really prioritize it on this one.
Yeah, we're going to try, but we also might look at maybe making a more exclusive call-in system for members or something like that.
Following TMBS model.
Yeah. Hey.
Membership has its call numbers. Okay. Sebastian Gorka was back into the news to remind us of the clown and clown fascism that runs this country. He was having a debate on News 8, which I actually have literally never heard of. And he was debating Democratic strategist Joel Klash. And Gorka had not only, of course, a defense of the disgusting, bloated fascist regime and its terrorism of immigrants, but in his uniquely, I'll say, special manner, Gorka had the most ingenious defense of the Trump immigration policy imaginable.
Hey, Jonathan.
Sebastian, I was about to give a brilliant answer, but go.
I'm sure we'll get to it. First things first, I find it weird your guest has a problem that I work for the president. To quote a certain senator from Illinois, elections have consequences. That's how this democratic republic works. As to the concern, the humanitarian concern of this president, I don't think anybody on the panel has actually worked for the president. I have. I worked for him as candidate Trump, and I worked for him in the White House. And I know this may be hard for the left to believe because they're trapped in their ideological bubble. He is one of the most compassionate presidents we have ever had. Whether it's inviting the survivors and the victims of the Parkland to the White House to listen to them and to talk to them, or whether it is being compassionate for the immigrants that are here legally who are most undermined by illegal immigrants. If you're at the bottom of the pay scale in America as a manual laborer who's recently arrived as an immigrant, guess who you are hurt by the most? Illegal immigrants who are going to come in and take your job with cash under the table. This president wants to protect those people, irrespective of their skin color, irrespective of where they came from, and irrespective of whether they voted for him. That's who Donald Trump is.
Sebastian, you want to talk to me about compassion? Talk to me about this. When this president decides to prioritize putting these children back with their families, you can talk to me about compassion. Until then, I don't want to hear anything about it about Donald Trump.
You don't get
because
to tell
the proof's
me
in
what
the
I
pudding.
don't get to say in America. I know you have.
I did no such thing. I believe the people here on the panel can verify that. I didn't do such thing.
And you don't get to shut me down. If Jonathan wants to,
I did no such thing.
If that's his
but I think you're proving my point that I made a little bit earlier. So thank
explain this to me.
Yes.
When the president wants to actually give status to double the number of DACA recipients that was originally planned. And
he had a bill in front of him, Sebastian. He could have signed it.
Refused.
Were you in his ear telling him to sign it?
Why did they do that?
Because he had an opportunity to sign it.
Why did
By the way, not a Democratic bill, not a liberal bill. He had a bill that he said he would sign.
You have no answer,
show me.
Right? You have no answer.
Show me. The president should go visit Missouri. He should show me. Show me that this president cares about this. He doesn't. This is a political issue for him.
Don't let the
and he has people like you in his ear, and that's the problem. That's why people don't trust what they hear on TV.
Facts.
All right, I'm going to have to cut it off right.
Joel Payne did a great job there, actually, and it was really impressive to watch Joel Payne do that. Because obviously, as much of a joke and an idiot as Sebastian Gorka is, he's a main, disseminator of propaganda and dishonesty for the Trump regime. Of course, he's lying on multiple levels there. DACA could have just gone forward. Trump blew it up to
use it as a bargaining chip
and feed his xenophobic, racist base. There was a bill that he did commit to sign. Of course, he has no idea what's in the bill, and he can be manipulated by his racist advisors on these issues. And yes, this is primarily a political issue. And also the notion people who come in to have jobs in orchards and slaughterhouses where they're underpaid and abused and exploited, they're bribing or somehow passing money under the table to get those jobs. No, they're cheap labor that can be easily abused and discarded because the companies are never held accountable. So, of course, companies are going to continue to access and exploit that labor. And yes, maybe Trump's answer is he wants Americans to do that labor because he wants to, as he himself said several times himself, wages in this country are too high, even at a time of completely historically unparalleled inequality. If you buy into any of this and you run any interference for any of this, you're innately an asshole and inhumane, as Joe Rogan said yesterday. If you defend any part of the kidnapping and extortion, you're a outside of the realm, immoral, disgusting person. And on top of that, if you are worried in any type of good faith way about the policy of what drags wages down, always look at the companies dragging wages down. Always look at
deciding wages.
Literally deciding wages with no governmental setting or policy making to protect them.
Yeah.
It is never people coming in here, documented, undocumented, or otherwise. It's pure racism and xenophobia. And to the extent to which they have economic plans for you, it's to make your life shorter, make you have less money, and work until you literally physically give out.
Yeah, and also look at the system that is incentivizing them to do that. Like, yes, the heads of the corporations are probably greedy and shitty people, and they're probably terrible.
It's nothing to do with them as persons.
They have been incentivized,
the market.
Yes, by the market, by unfettered capitalism, to behave in this way. So it's more
logical for them to.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but this really does go back to this particular economic system that we have, and it doesn't have to be this way.
Richard from Ohio, I ask again, please address Brexit in particular. What about Corbyn's refusal to reconsider Brexit? Why is he doing it? Every younger writer I follow thinks it's profoundly wrong-headed and it damages the UK's future. I addressed this on my show the other night. Look, two things I will say. I disagree with Corbyn on Brexit, but let me just say this. The profound default assumption that you should just blow off democratic will, I have a problem with. Jeremy Corbyn is respecting, which there's also, by the way, a little bit of political savvy in, the one referendum which a majority of people in the UK, even with as bad as it's been, still support, according to the latest polls I saw. Number two, he comes from a left tradition that critiques the EU. Now, it's a tradition that it mostly is right about the EU, and we've seen it in things like austerity and how even the euro as a currency was designed in a way that even a guy like Paul Krugman lays out the case against the design of the euro. So that's his tradition. Now, that tradition has no political power in Europe, and functionally speaking, obviously Brexit is a big problem economically for the UK. That being said, Jeremy Corbyn has actually proposed several months ago keeping in the customs union, continuing to tight trade relationships, and also is quite the opposite of the Brexiteers with regards to issues like immigration, open borders. So I think that within the context of his ideology and the politics of the fact that this thing passed, which it's just like, I would probably support another referendum, to be honest with you. I think that actually is what they should do. But this idea that you can just obviously the first step you do is just completely scrap what people voted on. Now, David Cameron shouldn't have put it to a vote, and it passed on lies and propaganda. And there was a lot of stupid voting taking place. But I am not comfortable and never going to get to the place of a Singapore opinion here. It still was, right or wrong, a democratic choice. It should be put to them again. That I support 100%. But you can't, a critique that's built on Corbyn for not just automatically saying, well, obviously step one is saying fuck you to the voters, I don't agree with. And I think he's actually threaded the needle fairly well, and it's going to get a hell of a lot more complicated when he governs. And in my view, that is where, especially as the economy is currently constituted, people like Tony Blair, they're right about some of these things. Yes, if there's a major economic you can't dump a bunch more money into NHS. You can't renationalize. You can't do these really important and essential things Corbyn wants to do if there is an absolute catastrophic economic fallout. Right? And that's the point when Blair talks to the left. And also even Blair says, even Tony Blair makes this comment. On the right, the plan of the Brexiteers, they lied. They said, less money going to Europe will mean more money for the health services. They're trying to make the UK look like Dubai or Singapore. They want it to become an island nation, although with less generous social benefits in the long term. So he's threading a needle. And it doesn't mean he's calling everything right, but this narrative is lazy and tired.
And too dependent on a single individual to be a savior.
Far too dependent on a single individual. Far too dependent on a single individual. But if I was him, I would come up with a much more aggressive blueprint for what a left European Union would look like. I would talk to groups like the advisor to the Belgian left party that we had on TMBS, talk about that type of thing, and then maybe say we should take this to referendum again. But it is not Corbyn's politics, nor is it his brand, nor is it the right thing to do to just say, yeah, obviously we're going to scrap what you want. Another side, Elon Musk is the Howard Hughes Dr. Moreau track. Snoozin Sarandon, can I get a shofar for joining the DSA and my city employee union on the same day?
Hell yeah.
Whoa, let me try it again. Attorney Andrew, go see Sorry to Bother You tonight. Yes, Sorry to Bother You is an excellent movie. I saw that with Trevor T from Champagne Sharks. Also, song suggestion for Gulag or Re-Education, The Guillotine by The Coup. Yeah, I'm surprised we haven't used that yet, actually. Metaflight. Listening to this week, I was reminded of the Paris Commune of 1871. Soon after the revolutionaries kicked the government out of Paris into nearby Versailles, they were faced with a choice. The statist leftists wanted to establish an emergency government in order to organize a march on the Versailles government and destroy it. The anarchists wanted to focus on establishing a model democratic government in social forms within the boundaries of Paris, expecting social movements in the rest of France to see them as an example and have their own revolts. The Commune leaned to the second option. Needless to say, France isn't an anarcho-communist state today. The moral is pretty clear. Beat the enemy in front of you with the imperfect means you have. Yes, indeed. Jay Tingle. What is the version of La Poupée by Jacques Dutronc? Kind of an Elvis singing a Dylan song, which he did a few times. I don't know anything about that. Anton was the French Dylan. Dude, I can't be happy or unhappy because I don't know what any of this stuff means. All right, final call today. You're calling from a 582 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 582, are you there?
582.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I was way too quick on that. Please call in tomorrow. I apologize. I'm just trying to be fast here to get. You're calling from a 760 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Yeah, my name's Matt. I'm calling from California.
Hey, Matt, what's going on?
I recently started listening to your guys' show, and I just want to call in and say that you guys are awesome, man. Calling out a bunch of scumbags, specifically about the idiotic excuses that people are using to justify separating kids from their parents at the border.
Yep.
This bullshit, just all that shit just mixed together, man. I just want to say you guys rock and keep doing what you guys do, man. It's awesome.
Much appreciated. Thanks so much, man. Have a great day.
You know, it's interesting since we've been focusing on IDW stuff. It's also been around that was also around the time Cernovich went after us. We've been growing a lot in that whole time, and it's resulted in a lot more negative attention. Right, the comments are a bit harsher. You get more trolls that favor eugenicists.
Right,
but
more saddled racist men.
At the same time, our subscriber count is pretty big, so people are loving it.
There's a little thing called the silent majority. That I will tell you. And the final I am of the day.
The non-race realist majority.
There's the non-race. There's people who have basic human sentiments, aren't racist, and have common ethical sense and a sense of humor, and they are the majority. That I will tell you. Not the sad racist people. R. Scott P. I live in Martha's Vineyard, and the Dersh has never been liked here. He's always been an entitled prick. To which I would add, also, as always, hey, Alan, I have no idea. Could you enlighten me? What was happening on those Epstein planes you were on? We're back live tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar. But finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive between the 101